Call to order the Grant County Board of Commissioners special meeting for November 14, 2017. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance and the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico. This is a symbol of perfect friendship among the United cultures. So everybody can hear. You guys are going to have to be quiet. So you're going to have to be quiet so you can hear. So, first item on the agenda is to approve the special meeting agenda. Are there any changes need to come to the special meeting agenda, Madam Manager?
No, sir.
Commissioners?
No, sir.
Not seeing none, I will accept a motion. So moved. Second. There's a motion and a second to approve the special meeting agenda. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. Tonight we're here for a discussion regarding the purpose and need for a special use airspace optimization project for Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. Alan Schaefer, DAFC, is our presenter. Now, there's a lot of people in the room. There's a lot of emotions. Remember, the Air Force people here today are the Commission's guests. They are here to talk to us, give us a presentation, and answer our questions. When that is over, you are welcome to have public input. Once again, be cognizant of the time. There'll be 3 minutes per person, but if you're getting up and saying the same thing over and over again, I think Commissioner Brown said it best. to remember that it's our time, their time, your time. Yeah.
Have respect for all of us.
Have respect for everybody's time.
Yeah.
So at this time, Mr. Schaefer, if you would like to take the podium, there's a white button right up there. If you push that, and you could introduce your group. And then go ahead on with your presentation.
Super. Yeah, you want to come across? Super.
You got to get close to it, Mr. Schaefer.
I will. Thank you. I would like to thank the Commission for this opportunity to come up and talk to you, the County of Grant County, the citizens of the county, also Silver City, also anybody else from around this part of New Mexico. It's really our pleasure to be here to talk to you all today. So before I get started, I do want to introduce the other members from the different bases that came to help us. So I'll start over on this end. If you can speak loudly, or I think you can use the white button. Yep. Okay, I'll speak a little louder, sorry. Good. Juan Maguire Perez, Holloman Airspace Manager. Matthew McGovern, Holloman Public Affairs.
Donald Hathaway, Holloman Public Affairs. Andrew J.R. Kamala, Holloman Environmental. Elliot Sanders, Headquarters ACC Airspace Manager.
Super. Well, I'll speak a little louder. Normally I don't use a microphone, so I tend to stay away from these things. So I'll try to speak with a command voice as much as I can today. Once again, the Air Force is just had finished the scoping comment period for this action. The optimization plan involves all the airspace in New Mexico and Arizona and as a bigger scope. But we picked those things out as smaller organizations. So we first picked Holloman Air Force Base, mostly because we have a fighter pilot shortage in the United States Air Force. And Holloman Air Force Base is our primary location for training F-16 pilots. So Holloman Air Force Base has the most important need for airspace optimization. We have special use airspace across New Mexico. A lot of that airspace was developed 30, 40 years ago for airplanes we no longer fly. So we try to put our new airplanes into these small pieces of airspace. So it was really important for us to do an optimization. Our goal is to try to get back to the public more airspace, especially this airspace that we have today, than we will give in the future, than we will add. So Holloman Air Force Base is the first place we were looking at. So we took all the airspace that Holloman Air Force Base is scheduled to use and close enough to the base, and we wanted to optimize that airspace. The F-16s they fly at Holloman Air Force Base is not the same F-16 we flew 20 years ago or 15 years ago in the Air Force. It has a radar that looks a lot further out, looks for targets a lot further out, and has weapon systems that can reach out further out. So because of that, we need airspace that's designed for an F-16 of this century instead of F-16 airspace or F-86 airspace that was designed in the old days. So we had to look for optimization. So we have several airspaces. We look for volume, that's that size I was just talking about. We look for the proximity, how close it is to the base. It needs to be fairly close to the base in order for us to operate in. Typically, we take 150 miles as the very maximum. We use 120 miles, and 90 miles is kind of our rings distance from the base. So when we went through and looked at this airspace operations, we were able to see some airspace that worked out very well, that currently we have special use airspace. As an example, Talon MOA, which is to the east of White Sands Missile Range. You'll probably hear me talk about east of Wismar or west of Wismar. When I say Wismar, I'm talking White Sands Missile Range. If I'm talking east, I'm talking about the airspace we currently have over there, the Talon MOAs. And to the west, we're talking about this area over in this location. So I work in the airspace shop, and I work closely with the FAA every day on what we do with special use airspace, how the military gets their mission done. So when I talk with the FAA, whose mission is safety and efficiency of the national airspace system, they're the ultimate person that decides where we would put our airspace. They look at the airspace out there across the country and go, okay, here's, if you put your special use airspace here, you're going to impact the national airspace system. That impacts commerce around the nation. So we look totally just at the airspace system, the way airplanes fly, the way they fly around different locations. White Sands Missile Range being a big location that's hard to fly across, and it creates some areas that there aren't a whole lot of airplanes that fly in. So when you look at a map, and I'm just talking totally an aviation perspective, you look at a map, not only do the east side of White Sands Missile Range make sense, but the west side is a reasonable alternative for us to put airspace. So we look at the airspace only. So we came down with alternatives, one being the east side and one being on the west side. Now our EIS, when we go into the EIS and as we start studying the EIS, we'll be looking at lots of different subject areas. Social economic impacts, we'll look at land use impacts, we'll look at cultural impacts. We'll also comply with all federal agency regulations to include the National Historic Preservation Act, and we'll do the Endangered Species Act and the Wildlife Act. We're going to work in conjunction with all of those federal laws as we go forward. So we're going to analyze that. So the scoping period has a deadline, at time it passed, and we selected 3 locations to do our scoping, one for each of the sub-areas that we were talking about. One was the Talon MOAs. We had a meeting in Carlsbad to talk about that to those concerned citizens. We had one in Truth or Consequences to talk about the Smitty-Cato potential movement. And then we had one in Las Cruces because it was a population center. And we don't know where any airspace that may exist to the west side. We don't have that line drawn on a chart right now. What we have is, I'm told, here's an area of airspace that we might be able to use. So we haven't put any lines on a chart yet. We just know generally what we're going to use, what we need, and a general location of where that will be. So our scoping meetings were meant to help us solicit inputs from the public on where that location should be. What is important to the people here, the people in Las Cruces, the people in Truth or Consequences, the people in Carlsbad, and across the whole state? What's important to you to help us focus the EIS to make sure we analyze each of those areas and answer those things adequately in our EIS. So we're looking for the help. So even though the scoping period ended on the 25th of September, the Air Force is required, could I get a little glass of water? I'm sorry, I'm talking way too much here, I'm really sorry. Thank you so much. The Air Force doesn't really have a plan where this will be to the west side. We just don't know. So even though the scoping period has ended officially, and to open that scoping period back up, we'll have to take this project back a year or so. And I told you we have a fighter pilot shortage. A year puts us back a little bit. So every comment the Air Force receives through the entire process, until a record of decision is made, will have to be considered. So for the next year and a half, or 2 years, or 3 years, or however long this action will take place, there will be a website that comments could be made to, and the Air Force is required to review that comment, to make sure we have thought through this process. We do not want to end this process and try to give thank you so much. That's good water, good water. So, it does. Some very nice water you have in the Gila. But, it's really important that we understand early on in this process what is important and what we need to focus our EIS on. I've heard a lot of comments about the social economic impacts that this airspace may have. I've heard a lot about the land use. I've heard a lot about wildlife, and those are all very important areas. We have not even started the analysis yet, so I could not even answer those kinds of questions right now. But what I would encourage is, if I was on a telephone conversation yesterday and I heard about the Gila trout and the Rio Grande trout. And first time I heard those. That was a great input, okay? I needed those kinds of inputs to help us, the United States Air Force, focus this EIS. So we look at each of those things, and we have answered those things, and we understand what the impact would be, so we can give an informed information to a decision maker who's going to make the final decision on the record of decision. So the scoping was just the first phase. It's the beginning of the beginning. And right now, we're probably in the middle of the beginning. So we are still accepting comments at the website, accepting comments that can be written and mailed to the address. It's on the website in Hampton, Virginia. And we encourage you to send those comments. This was not meant to be any secret squirrel society to keep this information away from anybody. This is probably the most open airspace action that's ever happened, at least my experience looking at this stuff for 40 years, in that we are putting the information out as best we can early on. And the information was sent out, and I'm sorry that the information didn't flow all the way down to the concerned citizens. I will tell you that we hear the people in Silver City, we've heard people in other parts of the state of New Mexico, and we are seriously considering adding other locations when we do the public hearings in 6 to 12 months from now. So, and we will inform those people, if that gets approved and the contract signed, we will inform you as early as we can about those public hearings and where those locations will be. The public hearings are a lot different than the scoping meetings. The scoping meeting was just to kind of get the information and what's important to everyone. That public hearings, you will have a chance to review the draft EIS, and I encourage everyone, all your constituents, to go to the website and sign up on the mailing list. That mailing list will then allow the Air Force to send a copy of the draft EIS to that individual who asked for it, and you will be able to review that, and there will be a period of time, usually it's 45 days, for you to send in comments. And those comments then become the second part of the administrative record. I didn't mention the administrative record. All the comments received during the scoping, and any comment I receive today or tomorrow or next week or last week, are all part of the official administrative record. They will be continued to be held on to and analyzed and looked at. So, even though scoping is over, any inputs will be greatly appreciated by the United States Air Force, and welcome for those inputs to come in. So, When we have the draft EIS, we will come back out and have people have plenty of time to review that draft EIS, come up with some questions, and any question that comes across, written, oral, or central website, mailed in, we'll have to answer specifically each of those questions, where we are, what we're going to do, and answer the questions. So many of the questions I'm hearing now, we haven't even analyzed, so it's going to be until we get the analysis done and present that, that's when the time you can look and see what we think are the impacts to the personnel, to land values, to the animals, whatever else out there. So we're going to look at all those areas. And if we didn't do it sufficiently, we want you to look at that and tell us we didn't do a good job at it, and want us to analyze it some more. You may have disagreements, you may have additional information. The Air Force is required by law to look at all those inputs and analyze those inputs, and that will be answered in the administrative record and in the final EIS. So that's where we are right now. I am sorry that there was some misunderstanding about the meetings. I am sorry that the Air Force was not able to come out to this location and have a public scoping meeting. I truly am. And I will say that I am looking forward to working with the commission, the city, everyone across the New Mexico, southern New Mexico, as we go forward to make sure we have analyzed the proper information. So that's what I have for an opening, and I can answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at this time, we will stand for commissioner questions. I always like going over here first.
Trade off. I'll have several. So maybe we could just
That's fine.
keep going in a circle or something. Mr. Schaefer, my name is Harry Brown, County Commissioner. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for bringing your team. I hope you had an enjoyable trip, and I actually hope you have a chance to get out and see the area that we're all so passionate about. I have no idea if your schedule will allow it, but it's a beautiful country.
We did work a little bit today, and we plan to be back. We did make it up to the Buckhorn Saloon and Restaurant. They were highly recommended, and it was a very enjoyable green chili stew I had at lunchtime, so thank you very much.
So, I appreciate your apology about having left this area out of the public hearings in the scoping process. And I appreciate your commitment, was an almost commitment, to including us in future phases. I'd love to hear it be a real commitment instead of a do what we can commitment. But my question actually is whether you can explain how it was that we got left out.
And again, the decision by the Air Force was that we had three pieces of airspace that we were looking at. The Talon-MOA area, which is over on the east side of White Sands Missile Range. We were looking at Smitty-Cato MOA, which is up by Truth or Consequences. And then we were thinking about an additional new airspace called Lobos, we came up with that name, Lobos MOA, down here in this area. We don't know where that would be. We went for a population center. So,
What would have been the problem with having a population center and a smaller population center?
absolutely nothing wrong with that. We wanted to ensure that Silver City was aware of the meeting of Truth or Consequences. 3 meetings is a pretty standard type of meeting for that size of airspace. We usually take a look at that and set it up by that. Some airspaces that are about 20 times the size of the airspace that we're looking at here had 8 meetings, 9 meetings. So 3 seemed like the reasonable amount that we should use, and we really wanted to go to the population centers to hear as much as we could. So the selection was Las Cruces over Truth or Consequences. We did try to make an important notification to the city to let them know, to the county, I should say, and through the newspaper to let you know about the meetings in Truth or Consequences. We really hope that you would have made the trip, but I understand that maybe we should have had more meetings. That was the decision the Air Force made. It's a standard policy and practice to do those.
I guess I didn't realize there was an effort to contact us. Was that our fault that we did not know about the meeting in Las Cruces?
I don't want to say anybody's fault because...
Well, maybe you could describe what you sent to whom.
Sure. We sent a letter to the county administrator. We sent a letter addressed to the lead county commissioner, and we sent one to the state senator's office. And then we advertised in the paper, one of the papers, I can't remember which one it was, The Sun, I believe, that we advertised the Tuesday and Thursday, I believe, before the meetings held the week before. So, I don't have the exact dates, but I can get those for you,
Okay.
if you'd like.
Well, thank you, and in the spirit of keeping things rotating,
Sure.
I'm done for now.
So you know, I don't have any recollection of receiving a letter like that. I might have, but I don't have a recollection of receiving that letter. So I get a lot of stuff.
Well, I will be honest, I mean, we sent a letter with a map explaining we were having meetings and truth or consequences. I will tell you that one of the people we sent letters to said, well, we saw a meeting in truth or consequences, we saw a meeting over in those are far away, and we didn't read all the letter. So I'm sorry that would have happened. I really think it's important we hear voices from the entire state of New Mexico and everybody important. So we are, like I said, seriously considering adding more locations, recognizing the city of Reserve is pretty far out. It's hard to expect people from Reserve to come in for a meeting and these kinds of things. So we're looking at adding additional locations to our public hearings.
Yeah, I'd also like to say welcome to Grant County and thank you and for your service to our country, all of you. So I guess I'd also like to express an interest in having more meetings, especially in even more remote locations where the actual flyovers will take place. So Reserve, Cliff, you said you were in Buckhorn today.
I think it was at the Buckhorn.
The Buckhorn.
Buckhorn.
Yeah.
Well, so speaking of Buckhorn, which is a town north of Cliff, last Wednesday they had a fire there.
Right.
I've talked to 4 eyewitnesses. They're very sure that it was related to military flyover and flares. Could you talk to that?
Absolutely. Chaff and flare is a standard policy we do across the country, different locations. We fly over a lot of national forests. We have different altitudes that we drop those flares at. The minimum altitude ever will be at 2,000 feet AGL. And during the analysis, there will be a lot of information provided. Those have to be analyzed before we're allowed to drop chaff and flare.
Just for the audience, AGL is above ground level, I assume?
Yeah. Again, I'm from the government, so I talk in acronyms a lot. So please stop me anytime I say an acronym to help. I want to make sure everybody understands clearly what I'm trying to say. So the minimum altitude is 2,000 feet above the ground, and the flares are designed to burn out much before that. There's a lot of analysis that's been done in the past, and that analysis will be reviewed and added into this document. Currently, Holloman Air Force Base drops chaff and flares over the areas we call beak MOAs, which are over the Sierra Blanca, is that the name of it? And the Lincoln National Forest now. We have, in my years of aviation service, which are 30 plus, I know of only one fire that was started by a flare, and that was a person who did something completely stupid, and shortly thereafter he found himself on his way out of the Air Force. So we don't need people who make mistakes that are that kind of mistakes. Recently, we just added, I will encourage people to look at the Oregon Air National Guard action that just was approved here in about 2 months ago. We do fly over a national forest there, and we have mitigations and plans on how we fly. Currently, Holloman will not drop flares in fire condition extreme or higher. They check every day with the National Forest Service. So so we have those mitigations. Now, there are lots of mitigations we put forward, and some of that is based on time, months of the year, certain times during perhaps recreation periods that people are using areas. So there are a lot of mitigations that can be put forward. So that will be looked through during the analysis, and some of those mitigations will be put into the document.
So, did you hear about the Buckhorn fire before tonight?
I did not.
Okay. Yeah, so part of my written comment to you will be, and I'll encourage those four eyewitnesses that I talked to, and I think there may be a fifth one that I didn't talk to. They didn't see the fire start, but they saw the flyover. They have seen flares. They have pictures of flares in previous times, and there's another case of a fire purportedly. So I'll pass that all along to you.
Please do. Thank you very much.
Can I ask another question? There's a large, I would say 30 to 60 feet sheets of plastic, looks like saran wrap. Is that part of your operation?
No, not that I know of at all.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass that on to you, but not to tie up any more time in this meeting. I'll just pass that on to you in writing and get the people who have that story to pass that to you.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And if there is a concern that a flare was dropped and started a fire, the Air Force would be very interested in investigating that. We'll send people out to look for that.
Okay.
So if you got that information, we'll be happy to pass that to the right
I'll get
agency.
that to you before the evening ends, then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Most importantly, thank you very much for showing up, but most importantly is their safety for our residents, and that's number one. How many flights do you have daily in the Gila as of right now, and how much are you planning to have in the future?
I'd have to look up, because Holloman doesn't currently use any airspace that goes over the Gila. I don't believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We do have a VR route, visual route 176, that is a low-altitude route that we fly from time to time. We are using that probably less now than we did 2 years ago, but there is a visual low-level route that could be flown from time to time. It is not authorized for flares or chaff, and it flies at different altitudes above the ground. Those altitudes range from 100 feet above the ground to more like 500 feet and higher. So,
What type of aircraft is that?
it could be flown by, the scheduling agency is the 49th Fighter Wing, or the 49th Wing, I should say, out of Halibut. So it would primarily be used by F-16s, formerly used by the German Air Force when they were here. They're almost gone now. I'm not sure if they fly anymore, but they're about to shut down their operations. Any aircraft that's authorized, military aircraft, DOD by FAA regulation is supposed to find a route before they create their own route. So it could be used by other organizations. I would have to come back with an answer on how many times that somebody flew on that route.
And how many times are we expecting to have flyovers?
Let me, the analysis is going to give you a little more information, but I'm going to give you a general idea of what we think. We put in as many as 10,000 stories, approximately that number, in the document, notice of intent. The number 10,000 came from a simple mathematical formula that said, okay, at right now, the maximum number of aircraft that would be flown at Holloman Air Force Base in the short term would be about 20,000, 21,000 sorties. About 56% of those are flown on White Sands Missile Range. So additional airspace may be used. So we've put in the maximum number because that's what we are looking at initially. But as we go through, not all those sorties will be flown at low altitude, not all of them will be flown at high altitude, they'll be at different altitudes. But until we start going through the scoping phase and step into the next phase of where we would draw these lines and what we think makes sense to both the public and to the Air Force, those numbers will be refined a little bit more.
Let me interrupt you for a second,
Sure.
Mr. Schaefer. As you notice, the town of Silver City has appeared. Thank you, Milo. And he's going to allow us to keep this number of people in the room, but what we can't do is be directly in front of any door that says exit.
If you guys can shift this direction, we can allow for this amount of people as long as we have pretty low traffic through the door.
So long as we have walkways to the exits in the back and we don't have these two exits, Chief Milo is going to let us continue our meeting, and I think that's awfully gracious of him.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Chief, I had a brief follow-up. You mentioned you don't think that Holloman uses any airspace right now over the Gila, but the map that we've been given shows a reserve MOA and a Morenci MOA, both of which, although it's not very detailed, both of which appear to cover at least a portion of the Gila.
You are absolutely correct. Both of those MOAs, military operating areas, are too far for the Holloman people to operate in right now, and both of those areas are scheduled by the 162nd Fighter Group, or Fighter Wing, out of Tucson, the Arizona Air National Guard. I kind of tried to come up with a number of sorties that were flown in both of those areas last year. I'm afraid if I gave you a number, it would be skewed and possibly off, but it's used significantly, but normally at a higher altitude, medium altitude and above.
So then, we could infer from that, from your earlier comments, that based on the idea of 3 meetings and only having meetings in population areas, that the folks from Arizona that are using our airspace probably we would never have known that they made the decision to use our airspace. Is that correct?
The airspace, Morenci and Reserve, were both developed by the F-15s at Holloman Air Force Base back in the 80s, 70s, many years ago. When the F-15 transitioned out of Holloman Air Force Base, the Air National Guard out of Arizona asked if they could take over scheduling activity for those areas. And that's perfectly acceptable as long as they're flying within the scope of the initial EIS to put the airplanes there. And so, Tucson, Arizona, the Air National Guard out of Arizona schedules that. Again, it's a pretty long haul for an F-16, so most of the airplanes that operate there are higher altitude. And maybe if I could explain in 30 seconds or less, I'll try to be louder if that's... I'll try to explain in 30 seconds or less. Airplanes at a higher altitude burn less gas. So if you were going to try to fly down at 500 feet AGL, we try to keep that normally for an F-16 within 90 miles of the base. At a higher altitude, we can go up to a little bit higher because we don't do the drop and climb and drop and climb. So we save gas. So if you're looking at a longer distance, usually we're operating at a higher altitude. So the altitude equals fuel savings. That's why the airlines are flying at 40,000 feet every day.
Don't have anything yet, but everybody's asked my questions.
So
You got a follow-up?
I followed up with Gabe's, but I have a question.
No.
Okay. So, I would like for you to describe what it's like to be underneath an F-16 that is flying at 500 feet AGL.
This is going to be personal. The actual noise analysis will come out in the draft EIS to tell you the noise. I will tell you, I spent a lot of my military career living underneath airplanes flying at 500 feet every day. It's again that I'm used to that noise, so I was used to it. So we fly at 500 feet a lot across the nation at different locations, and we understand every airplane will make noise, but that is what we are going to analyze and tell you what the average noise will be, what the maximum noise would be through the analysis. So that's the best I can do for describing it. I will tell you, for me, 500 feet doesn't, I love airplanes, so I've got a different perspective than anyone else would have, perhaps.
Commissioner Brown, you lost your spot because I thought of a question. So, at 500 feet, are they going to fly supersonic?
Oh, absolutely not. Supersonic,
Are they going to fly supersonic at all?
the option
Are
is...
they
that-
supposed to, I guess is the question.
When we do our analysis, the requested right now at this point is up to 10% of the sorties would be flown at perhaps supersonic, and that will be above 30,000 feet, which is 6 miles up in the air. We have lots of studies done, and 30,000 feet is a standard altitude that's used across the country everywhere. So the specific analysis will come out during that analysis. What's important about supersonic is the F-16, flying supersonic for the F-16 is a significant event for the student. Not that you're going to see Elvis Presley or anything else when you go supersonic. There's nothing special about that. What it does is it burns a lot of gasoline. So when you do that, you're going to end up cutting 15 minutes off of your sortie, which is at takeoff to landing one airplane flying its mission. So the idea at this altitude is the student is going to be presented with a position that goes, okay, if I go supersonic at this point, I lose 15 minutes of my mission time. I'm supposed to be here to defend something or to be here. And if I go supersonic, I lose that. But to get into a proper position to make a shot, I may have to do that supersonic. So those are decisions that he has to make on the spot in the airplane. So we will only do that high altitude, and it will only happen occasionally because we don't present that student with that situation very often. So.
Okay, I'm going to somewhat cheat because I've got a couple of follow-ups before my next real question.
Okay.
One is, I'd really appreciate it if you could email me, you're welcome to email the county manager, the documents that you initially sent to the county, just because one of the most mystifying things to me is our complete unawareness of that this is going on. So if you could do that,
I'll be happy to.
I would appreciate it. And second, I just wanted to express some skepticism, and this isn't a debate, but
Sure.
you mentioned that if we had extended scoping to include Silver City, it would have delayed the EIS a year, and I don't believe that's true.
Okay, and I will try to explain that to you, that if I were to open the public scoping again, I would have to go back to the Federal Register and publish that again. I would also have to include any city within 150 miles who wanted to have that same type of thing happen, a public scoping meeting. So I would go back, and it takes me about 2 months to get something in the Federal Register. It has to be there at least a month before you get hand, and then we'll have to go back and go through a series of committee meetings again. So this whole process will take 6 months, 9 months, to probably 12 months. It took me from, I guess, about May till to August to get the Federal Register, the first public notification put into the Federal Register. So I don't want to put blame on the bureaucracy, but the federal government is a bureaucracy. So it's not my office that sends out that public notification. Many other offices have to touch that.
I merely wanted to express my skepticism, not debate with you.
Okay, right.
So my question is that I would assume the Air Force has done this before, probably many times. And so I'm hopeful that you can tell me what the process is of evaluating the effects on wildlife and on environmental health of a proposal like this. Can you just tell me what that process is?
In the EIS, environmental justice and health, and children's health are areas that are required by executive order for us to review. Biological resources will be reviewed, and all those areas will be looked at. We've done this many times, and if you look at any of our, again, I will direct you perhaps to the Oregon Airspace Initiative. You can look that up, Googling it, and it has a EIS that was published, and the final EIS, and it talks in detail some of that information, and that shows you the type of analysis that will be forthcoming. We will look at that, and if anyone objects, thinks we didn't do an adequate job on that, that's the kind of thing that would come out in the public hearings, and we'll have to go back and evaluate that.
So in this Oregon Airspace Initiative, I would find some results as far as scientific study of the impacts of these overflights on wildlife, for example?
They should be in bibliography and all the documentation of what research and analysis they've looked at, yes, sir.
And are you able to give a brief summary of that?
I'm not a resource kind of guy. I'm sorry to say, if I try to get into it, I would just screw this all up.
The gentleman second from the left here? Okay.
I hate to analyze what we think we might be doing.
And I realize the wildlife is different there.
So,
I have no doubt about that.
we spend a lot of time looking at that area, those areas. So I encourage you to look at that and see what the kind of analysis we did in Oregon.
That involves dropping chaff?
Absolutely.
So presumably I would also find there some of the effects of that.
Absolutely.
Which, I don't know if this is true, but I've been told the number 77 trillion, presumably tiny pieces of plastic, are involved in a year's worth, 15,360 chaff droppings. Is that what's going on? No, okay. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah. Again, the analysis will come forward. A lot of information about chaff and flares is dated, and that information specifically will be into this document, and you can look at that analysis. A lot of the chaff and flare has developed over time. What we used in the 1950s and the 1970s to 2000 are completely different made composition. The Air Force has been responsive over time to the environment and some of the things we've done, so we've tried to change the way we do business.
But the Oregon Airspace Initiative, that will reflect the modern version of those things.
Absolutely, you can take a look at that.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so, we're just jumping all around here, sorry, here I am.
No problem.
So are you currently, and for how long, if yes, flying over this airspace that's on the map, the extended airspace into New Mexico?
We're not currently flying over the airspace that's in the circle that you show on there, the proposed Lobos area of where we're thinking we would go. We don't currently fly military aircraft there in special use airspace because there is no special use airspace there. I'd have to get more specific numbers and get clearance from the Arizona Air National Guard before I presented the number, but the number will be in the final EIS on what's used in the current emergency and reserve MOAs.
So,
And the same for Smitty K.
the planes I've got pictures of are they're not fighter jets. They're large 4-engine aircraft.
Right.
I've been told C-130s. Does that make sense to you?
The C-130 does have 4 engines. It would be hard for me to know.
So would those necessarily be coming from Holloman, or could they be coming out of Tucson or somewhere?
It could be coming out of several other locations. C-130 training happens at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. C-130 training happens out of Clovis at Cannon Air Force Base. There are C-130s that fly out of Davis Mountain in Arizona, Tucson. Now, normally those airplanes, the idea of a military operations area, the MOA, that you see on those maps, are to allow military aircraft to fly at high speed. Typically, the speed limit is 250 knots, nautical miles per hour, which works out to close to about 300 miles an hour. That's the limit on airspace, in the national airspace system. That's the speed limit. But in a military operations area, we are authorized then to go at a higher airspeed. So most of these airplanes will be flying around 400 to 500 knots and a much higher speed and velocity. The military training route we talked about, which is VR-176, the aircraft are authorized to go faster than 250 knots there. Now, I brought that up because the C-130 doesn't fly at 250 knots. It would be kind of a miracle if it did.
They're big.
So those airplanes don't have to have a military operations area to operate at. Typically, they will operate under federal aviation regulations. Now, that doesn't allow them to drop chaff or flare. If they were going to do something unique other than fly VFR randomly, then they would have to go back and do some analysis and create something.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Commissioner?
I don't even know where to start.
Just start.
So, am I correct in assuming that the Oregon Airspace Initiative would have documented, in addition to the wildlife impacts, et cetera, fire, what kind of terrain is that? How is it similar to here?
There's a national forest there. It is typically high desert. Forested sounds like the Gila area to me, but I haven't been out to either location, so to understand that. There was a lot of concern about fire. A lot of detail put into that action on how they would deal with that type of thing, how we were going to operate. Now, the Oregon Airspace Initiative is for the F-15, a different aircraft, and it has a little bit different mission than the F-16. So we couldn't use a one-for-one analysis of what we said in Oregon to bring it here to the Gila area. We want to make sure we look at the Gila area specifically and look at those risks and make sure we have collected all that proper information. I point you toward the Oregon just to show you that what the level of input and thought and use as we do this analysis. So I would caution anybody to take anything out of the Oregon document and say, oh, that's how they're going to operate here, because they're different airplanes, different platforms, and the specifics on how the F-16 will operate will be slightly different than the way the 15 operates out of Oregon. So,
How many times have you gone through this what you describe as extremely thorough EIS process, and you've gotten to the end of the process and made the decision that your plan was not workable?
okay. I have personally been in this job since 2011. I have been involved in 5 EISs in heavy detail. This is the 5th. And one of those actions, you may have looked up it before, it was called the Cannon-LATA, which is low altitude training. That one was withdrawn, mostly because Cannon Air Force Base came up with some new airplanes and new requirements, and so for us to put analysis out there that didn't make sense was incorrect. So we're going to revisit the Cannon Air Force Base airspace action as part of the RSOP at a later date, sometime down the road, when that information is right.
What's an RSOP?
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Thank you for ringing. RSOP is the Regional Special Use Airspace Optimization Project. That's where we started looking at 2015 and go, we have a lot of special use airspace across the southwest United States, and some of it just doesn't make sense for the airplanes we have today. And we have a goal to return as much of that back to the public as we can. At the same time, we want to optimize the airspace that we have. So I'm sorry I used that phrase RSOP, because RSOP, if you read in the, it is the overarching, this is a portion of the RSOP. Our goal is to optimize the airspace as a bigger project, and we have taken the Holloman because that part of the action is ripe for analysis. So we're looking at Holloman.
So what you're really saying is that you're going to revisit the Cannon-LATA, low altitude training area, which, as I recall, was about 94,000 square miles when it was originally proposed.
It was pretty large, yes. And again, this was proposed before my time. I just got here in time to be part of the process of pulling it back to revisit it. The requirement was based on the size of a low-altitude tactical navigation area that's used by Hurlburt Field in Florida. And that's the area which the C-130s and CB-22s out of Hurlburt may operate in. And so they simply said, okay, here's the size of what we have in Florida, which crosses, I will tell you, goes up as far as Knoxville, Tennessee. So it's a pretty large area, and they wanted an area that large too. The larger the area, the less often they would fly over any location and spread their activities out over a larger area. So they started out with a very large box and said, okay, tell me what's important in this box. So they walked into this with a plan and then asked for public scoping afterward, and it caused a lot of issues with people that didn't understand what they were trying to say. We as an Air Force did a really bad job of trying to explain to the public what that was. So because of misunderstanding, we went to an EIS. We looked at what the requirements at Clovis, at Cannon Air Force Base were changing. We were receiving airplanes back that were purchased and sent to Afghanistan to fight the war. While we're bringing those airplanes back, they decided to base them at Clovis. So we were analyzing the airspace for an airplane, and we weren't going to fly solely that airplane. We were going to fly that airplane to the right amount. So our analysis was incorrect in that we changed the amount of airplanes, so we pulled that information back. Now, I will say, of the other EISs that were successfully completed to an end, to a record of decision, on each of those, there were a lot of mitigations that came in from the time we started the whole action until we actually came to a decision. A lot of that came from the scoping meetings we were held. A lot of that came from the public hearings. So we were looking at that information. So that's why we solicit that information as often as we can, as much as we can get, to help us make a good, informed decision.
John? The proposal, as I understand it, calls for 10% of the flights to be night flights. Is that right?
Approximately 10%. I don't have the exact number because we haven't gotten into the analysis, but we said approximately 10% would be at night, or over 10, something, we're approximately 10%.
Will those night flights involve release of flares?
Quite probably. Quite possibly.
I would hope that your analysis then includes an analysis of the effect of doing that on the fact that this is one of the darkest sky areas in the country, and in fact is officially designated on the west side of the Gila as a dark skies location. That astronomy folks come to this area for that purpose. I would urge you to include an analysis of nighttime flares on that.
Excellent. Thank you for that input.
So I would just follow up with that I can't imagine being a cow, a horse, an elk, or a deer and having that happen at night either. So I would think that your analysis would also need to include the effects of that on wildlife at night.
It certainly will.
That would be rather startling, I would think.
I look forward to seeing the effect of, what they've decided is the effect of the startling nature of these flights. I have experienced this several times, actually,
Okay.
Backpacking in the Gila. I don't know if we have no way of knowing what Air Force base these airplanes came from, but it is always very startling. I'm not a hunter, so I've never worried about it startling whatever I'm tracking, but it definitely jars the senses when one is in the wilderness.
Well, I was also thinking more about things like migration and, just interrupting how wildlife behaves, and the cattle.
So we've talked about the potential of flares to cause a fire. You mentioned there was one incident that you know of. Have there ever been any pilot training crashes in this country?
We fly airplanes. Airplanes, from time to time, are going to have a Class A accident, which is an accident that costs more than $2 million, a loss of life, or destruction of an aircraft. So that happens. I will say that our safety record as an Air Force has improved dramatically. The aircraft are much better than they ever were before. I think our training initiatives are better than they were before. The safety aspect is one of those areas that will be analyzed in the EIS, so they will put down a very specific information on the safety and the aspect of that in the EIS.
That's a yes.
I will say, there is always a chance of an accident happening. The chances of happening an airplane accident are pretty remote in today's flying environment.
And I haven't the vaguest notion, I guess, of the Class B or Class C, what other accidents there might be that perhaps don't involve loss of life or $2 million in damage, but I would imagine that they could still spark a fire.
Typically, a Class B accident would happen on the Air Force Base itself. It's we had a person who was injured and lost more than 10 days on the office work. It was destruction of an aircraft up over $100,000. Cost of today's airplanes. If an airplane fell off the taxiway, that's a Class B accident. If somebody jacking an airplane up and it fell off the jack, if he was hurt, definitely a Class B accident. If it was over $100,000, which it probably will be, it'll be a Class B accident. I'm sorry, I said Class A, didn't I? It was a Class B. Sorry, a Class B.
How much does an F-16 cost now?
I'm going to have to get back to you. It's pretty expensive.
But it's probably over $2 million.
$35 million.
Oh, way over.
Yeah, so if you lose one of those, it's automatically,
Oh, absolutely. If we lose an airplane, it's a Class A accident, so.
that's my point.
I'm thinking that maybe they could lose a fuel canister, right? I mean, something like that. Again, we were asking questions. I don't actually know this, but I would think there'd be other things besides the fortunately, extremely rare Class A accidents that could potentially ignite a fire, so that flares are not our only concern in that regard.
I understand. If you were to, I would use the flyer's term, punch off tanks, fuel tanks, you would only do that in an extreme situation where airspeed and altitude are critical. That usually happens within a mile or two of the base, which is what we caused the Federal Aviation to have a airport potential zone 1 and 2, where the likelihood of those kinds of incidents happening, we're not allowed to put schools, we're not allowed to put homes, we're not allowed to put anything really in those potential zones. Around that, then we have other zones that we can only put in light industry. So the concern of dropping the tanks off of an airplane would only probably happen at the takeoff. They're wired. You have to punch off those tanks, you have to purposely break a safety wire, flip a switch, and then flip another switch. So the chances of that happening just on a random flight, very, 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 very remote. In fact, I've never heard of it happening before. So
So I have a follow-up to that question, if you don't mind. Okay, well, I'm jumping the line by following up on you. So, I'm glad to hear that it's rare, but in the event of a Class A crash over the Gila Wilderness, who's going to pay to fight the fire? Or over the National Forest?
I will tell you that will all be decided in the action, but the federal government usually comes through that. In many instances, the Air Force has gone through the claims process and paid for those damages before. It has happened. So I wouldn't want to get out in front of what the lawyers and what the letter of agreement and the EIS would say, but normally a federal agency will step forward and take care of those bills. I will tell you that a federal agency will step forward.
Tax dollars, but... Right, we want to protect our budget.
Absolutely. Again, take a look. I will, in this case, give you a different location to possibly look up. Is the Powder River Training Complex, PRTC. It's in South Dakota, in airspace. It was added about 1.5 years ago. And in there, they spent a lot of time talking about fire suppression, how it would be taken care of. Now, about 12 years ago, you might help me out, ACC, but we lost a B-1 in that general area that landed on a rancher's ranch. and we went out, secured the crash site, and we paid through the claims process, everything involved in that V1 cleanup. So, in fact, that ranch was part of the support of when we went to Powder River. He came out in support and said, hey, the Air Force did what they said they were going to do. Couldn't be happier.
Back to you.
No, I guess I think at this point, I'm going to pass.
I think you're it. So go till you're done. Unless we have a follow-up.
Yeah, very good, and I'm fine with that, of course. So, I'm curious about enforcement. Your proposed action involves both high and low altitude ceilings. It involves speed limits. It involves, well, in particular, how high they have to be before they can create a sonic boom. What is the enforcement mechanism in the Air Force when a pilot doesn't follow those rules? And do you always know?
I will tell you that the Air Force can't monitor each of our individuals, but we will, as an Air Force, enforce flight discipline. The F-16 will normally fly as either an IP, an instructor pilot on that airplane, or an instructor pilot in the second airplane that may be flying in that mission. There would be then two sorties in that one mission. An instructor pilot is a very experienced pilot. He wouldn't continue to be in the Air Force unless he enforced flight discipline. The things you saw in the Great Santini movie and other things like that don't happen in today's Air Force. We don't have time for that. In today's Air Force, we need professional pilots who will go forth and do what is expected of them and follow the rules. So if we ever get across somebody who is a flight discipline problem, the unit usually takes care of that, and we can find another occupation for that person.
When you say you can't keep track of each pilot, can't there be things like black boxes?
Thank you for bringing that one. Yeah, we would. We do have flight data recorders on the aircraft.
That's what I mean.
It's not exactly a flight data recorder that you'd be used to on a 747 or a 707. And we use that later into the debrief on how we flew. So that stuff is kept around for a period of time. So if there was a noise complaint that was made or a question about dropping flares, we can go back and look at that data and look at that. I'm not sure what the time we keep that information on hand. We can also collect information from the FAA that keeps that data around for a long period of time. And if we were to go supersonic, you might be able to tell it on that aircraft or not. So in my 11 years, I spent one time where I was investigating a flight discipline problem that the Air Force took care of those individuals, and appropriately.
Okay. I appreciate the assurance that the modern Air Force is more professional, and I hope you understand that those of us not in the Air Force, we see tailhook, and we see what happened in Italy when a low-flying plane cut a gondola cable. I believe there was an incident in Spain not long before the one in Italy. So the image of a hot-dogging pilot is certainly one of my concerns. And
I understand. And I will certainly tell you that the Air Force is a different Air Force than we had 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We have learned from experience. I will never say that the Air Force made no mistakes. Sometime along the line, a pilot did something stupid, dumb, or dangerous. But starting in about 1991, in Desert Storm, we really have stressed the flight discipline issues heavily as we go forward, because we don't need to train pilots that are out hot dogging. We don't need those people around the Air Force. We need people, because we're a smaller Air Force than we were then, and our goal is to make sure every pilot is going to do exactly what's expected of him from the wing commander, from his flight commander, from the Air Force in general, and from the public. And if they can't live up to those standards, then we don't need them in today's Air Force. That's been big stress item since 1991. In fact, it's written in our core values, in integrity, excellence in all we do.
Okay, thanks. And I should note that I do realize Tailhook were Navy pilots, but pilots all the same.
And the incident in the case, we're also the Navy, but I won't mention it.
So I didn't know that. Okay.
I was in Italy when it happened, so.
You've mentioned a couple times now that you intend to give back more airspace than you'll be taking. I take it that's because you don't need some of these that are on the no-action alternative map?
The proximity of those bases, those airspaces, let's use Valentine as an example. Valentine is to the east, and it's down along the Mexican border in Texas. That's so far away from an Air Force base, it's hard for us to use it. If we had to use it because we are running out of airspace, we would use that today, but its proximity makes it very difficult to use. So that would be an area that we would look at if we're returning back to the national airspace.
I was meaning the lack of proximity, the fact that it's quite far away.
It's far away, correct.
So that actually raises a question I haven't been able to get my mind around.
Sure.
These MOAs are all discontiguous with, what did you call it, WISMA?
White Sands Wismar, yes.
So the airplanes have to get there.
Absolutely.
Can you explain how that time getting there isn't sort of an operations area as well?
Typically, I don't like to go across jet routes and Victor routes. The jet route is what high-altitude airplanes use to get around the world. That's based on 1950 technology of ground stations that told pilots where to go. It creates a highway system in the sky. And if I were to build something that touched over to reserve and went all the way to White Sands Missile Range, I would be creating a big roadblock for anybody who wanted to go from El Paso or from Silver City who wanted to go to Albuquerque. So I wouldn't want to do that unless I had a good plan to allow that aircraft to operate somehow moving north and south. So that is a very big concern of mine. I don't want to build something that's going to create a roadblock from Tucson, Arizona to past Holland. Okay,
So as I understand it, and I appreciate this, you're trying not to interfere with civilian and private plane.
Minimal impact.
But the planes still have to get to these MOAs where then they can train. So my question is, what does that look like, and why is that not part of, well, maybe it is. Is that part of the EIS?
It is not part of the EIS because when we do those flying operations, they fall under FAA regulations. We have to fly with every other airplane flying on their rules.
Okay.
And their airspace, their way to operate. So we would have what we would call a stereo route. The stereo route is something that's locally, we have a standard routing that's filed in our flight plan that would take us across White Sands Missile Range. So we could only use anything to the west of White Sands Missile Range when we have access to White Sands Missile Range. So that would be the only way we could use that airspace because of its proximity.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned also that you would not fly when the fire danger was extreme
Yeah, keep going.
or higher. Is that accurate? Am I paraphrasing you correctly?
I would not say we would not fly. We would not drop chaff and flare during
Thank
those
you.
periods of time.
Thank you for that correction.
Yeah.
Are you aware of how many days on an average year the fire danger is in fact extreme or higher in the Gila?
I do not know at the Gila. That would be part of the analysis we'll look at. I will tell you at the Oregon Training Initiative, we looked at the extreme versus high danger area, and the high danger area would create such a period of time that student would graduate with possibly never dropping a chaff or flare, which is a requirement. So we went with different mitigations in that action. So we will look at that as we get into that analysis.
Okay, and I don't think Randy is in the audience, right? You haven't seen him. He might have that number for us, but, okay. How many bases in the country currently train, and I'm just going to say fighter pilots, because I don't think I care whether they're F-16s or F-18s or F-35s.
Okay. Now we're going to work off the top of my head, so I'm going to work as best I can. F-15s are only trained in Klamath Falls, Oregon, by the Oregon Air National Guard. The F-15E is trained out of Seymour Johnson in North Carolina. The F-16 is trained at different locations. The majority are flown out of Holloman Air Force Base. Some are trained out of Tucson, Arizona. Some are trained out of Kelly Air Force Base in Lackland, in San Antonio, Texas. Let me try to think of some more fighter aircraft. The F-35s are trained out of Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona.
I get 6. Is that
Yeah,
right?
so I would say that 6 or 7, I'm probably forgetting some airplane, help me out. A-10s are trained right here in DM. Oh, yes, thank you. F-22s are trained out of Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, Florida. Thank you. Any other aircraft? So, coming off guard.
Well,
Sure, helicopter.
for a different reason, actually, I'm curious about helicopters.
Helicopter training is done by our sister service. So our helicopter pilots, after they go through their primary flight training, they're tracked into helicopters that are sent down to Fort Rucker, Alabama, where the Army finishes their training on helicopters. Then they're sent to their operational unit to get their top-off training in the aircraft type they have.
And I understand there's helicopter training out of Fort Bliss that comes this direction. Are you familiar with that?
I am not familiar with the Army operations out of Fort Bliss. I do know that they fly helicopters out of Fort Bliss. I don't believe they're training at all. They belong.
Refueling training, I believe, is part of what's involved.
I would be wrong if I even tried to say what they do. I'm not very familiar with any Army helicopters that refuel.
Go to the Fort Bliss website, and there is in fact an action for the local flying rules 95-1 update, and I don't believe it comes this far west. I looked at it, but it does cover a lot of terrain east of here, and that should have the details you're hoping you need.
Okay, thank you.
Follow-up question?
Sure, of course.
So you mentioned earlier that the Air Force is short of pilots.
Correct.
How many pilots short are you?
We anticipate hitting a maximum shortage of about 1,000 fighter pilots. And that should be happening in the next 2 years.
And I guess what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is then how much more space do you need to train them?
Wow. The optimization, the plan for optimization is to optimize all the airspace for F-16 operations. We didn't want to get into, we want to build airspace for 4 squadrons. So we want to optimize the airspace. And then once we decide what our basic 2 alternatives in scoping, then we were going to get into the analysis on how many airplanes we needed, how many we thought we could actually fly on White Sands Missile Range. I will tell you, White Sands Missile Range is very important to Holloman Air Force Base. First of all, it's proximity, it's right there. And second of all of our air-to-ground operations, any munitions we're going to drop off the aircraft, munitions being practice bombs or real bombs, have to be flown on both 2 ranges that are on White Sands Missile Range or the 3rd range. Centennial Class A or B? Yeah, Centennial Range, which is down part of White Sands Missile Range, Fort Bliss, I'm sorry, part of Fort Bliss and McGregor Range. So anytime the student has to go out and drop actual munitions, it's got to be on those locations. So when we start doing the analysis, we'll go, okay, we can throw this many airplanes. How we do that, we'll go through those 53 sorties. How many of those sorties will actually have to go to White Sands Missile Range? How many we can then put on White Sands Missile Range? Then we'll be able to figure out how many other airplanes would go outside of White Sands Missile Range to the proposed Talon on the west or the east, or a possible new location to the west. So,
How many new MOA areas are being considered right now?
right now, There's a action going on by the Air National Guard in the state of Maine. It's called Condor. There's a airspace action is being, let me try to think of what's actually, a lot of them are being thought through, but they're actually onto the street. Help me out, guys. Can you think of another airspace action? I just finished Oregon. I know that one's done, so, which one? Yeah, on the street. Yeah, we have to have public announcement. I don't want to say something that the Secretary, I don't want to get in front of the Secretary of the Air Force. If she decides that she didn't want to do something and I announced here we were going to do something, boy, you know, I won't hear the end of it, and I'll be living here in Silver City as a retiree very soon. So.
Or if you announced that you had 45 of them on the books and you didn't want to.
No, we really don't. We are required to put them in public, and if there's a cumulative impact of airspace actions against each other, we would put that into writing. So if we...
So I guess that's what I really want to, maybe that's what I really want to know is part of the NEPA process looking at the cumulative effect of what's happening from Fort Bliss, what's happening from Arizona,
We are required under NEPA to look at what other things that are going on in the area and that cumulative impact. So we would look at the helicopter operations out of Fort Bliss to understand what's going on. We are not the Army. Each of the services does their own thing, so I can't get into the middle of their analysis. I would look at their draft analysis if they have and add that information. If it's final, then we would refer to it. If it's not final, we would talk about, here's the cumulative impact that we anticipate, and refer to that document when it becomes final. So, yes, we do look at cumulative impacts.
So, what is your best guess on when you're going to have your public hearings?
My best guess, I'm going to tell you this, I probably shouldn't, but the governor's office asked me, when are you going to be here for the entire action? I told them yes, as soon as I get this action done, I'm retiring. And it's been delayed for a year and a half, so my retirement's being delayed. So, we anticipate public hearings in 6 months if it was my timeline, but we want to make sure we do a thorough investigation, so it might be as much as 12 months. Or if we have more information that comes in, we have to analyze again, we'll go back and do that again. But whatever we decide, whenever we come back, we're going to come back, we're going to make a more concerted effort to ensure that everybody is notified completely across South.
And I'm going to ask you, for the commission, please have one in Silver City, Grant County. I think these people deserve that. We have a lot of the forest.
And I'll tell you, the Air Force is happy to hear that comment. We will definitely consider that. And I hope we have better information for you in the near future.
You mentioned in your presentation that alternative 2, the one that affects us most directly, is pretty vague, that you don't have precise lines. It's actually something I could have drawn on my computer. It's kind of, I didn't expect it to be coming from you. When can we expect an actual defined alternative 2?
In the draft EIS, we would have a defined alternative 2. Where that boundary would be, the altitudes it would be. Right now, it would be, I don't want to say, well, I can probably say this. It would be inappropriate for me to go forward with a plan without talking to the public first. What we have over the Talon area is a already existing airspace that didn't meet our standards. So we spent a lot of time working with the FAA on that area. We spent some time with the FAA talking about this side of the area, and they kind of gave us some general ideas, what would be good for the national airspace system. So that's why you see some general things on that map. And I'm sorry I don't have enough maps for everybody. I gave them as many as I had out. But I will tell you, Smitty Cato has arrows on it, and the arrows point to the southeast towards Truth or Consequences. And the reason why those arrows are there is that the FAA has requested the northern part of those areas to be returned. So if you see those yellow dotted line on that area, they've asked for those to be returned because they send thousands of airplanes through there every day. So we have given that back to the National Airspace System, not officially, but we can't fly there. So we have to move the airspace adequately somewhere else. So that has an impact on the nation and the general economy for us to do that. So that was a request to move down. Now, how far down? That's part of the reason why we had a public scoping meeting, Truth or Consequences, to find out what's important and what you need us to look at. And the same thing for the area over here, the Lobos. It's a circle or an oval, and it's an oval purposely because I don't want to create a line on the chart that I can't live by. If I put a line on the chart and said, all right, this area is not going to be in the area, and then as we did more analysis, I have to put it in the area, I would feel like an Indian giver, and I don't want to be an Indian giver. I don't want to give anybody any information that could be taken as gospel right now, because it's not. We just have general information, and we're looking for more so we can decide where that boundary should be to meet both the Air Force needs and the public interest.
So I appreciate your note that it would have been inappropriate for you in the Cannon case to have gone forward with something without the right information for the public. But it strikes me that's what's happening here, that we've gone through a scoping period we didn't know about even those who did know about it didn't have a properly defined alternative.
Well, I can't properly define the alternative until I get through the scoping and begin the analysis. The part of scoping is, by the NEPA regulations, is to go out and find out from the public what's important to the public. Now, I would not have known about the Rio Grande trout, or the Gila trout, unless I go out and do those scoping meetings. So that information is helpful to the United States Air Force as we go forward. So when we go forward, and if the decision is to go with an alternative 2, we want to take a look at where those areas are and what the impact of our operations would be on those resources. So the scoping meeting is doing exactly what we've done in the past. Most of are what we should be doing by the NEPA regulations. What we did on the other side was an existing piece of airspace, so it's a little bit more defined because it's existing. So that's why you see some of our airspace actions were around existing pieces of airspace. What we did with Cannon was drew a line on a chart and go, okay, this is the area we think we'll fly in. What do you all think? And it generated a lot of problems because we had no real intentions of maybe flying over that. It was, here's the area we're interested in. So I don't want to start a public outcry, a public problem, because I don't have a problem. I don't know what the solution is yet. I don't know what our ideas are. So to send something with a line on the chart would give wrong impressions to people one way or another.
Okay, so given the difficulties that we've just been over,
Right.
I'm trying to envision what this might look like. And there's roughly a trapezoid that is enclosed in this yellow dotted line you referred to that is being returned to the FAA or might be returned to civilian airspace. That leaves a relatively narrow strip to the north of that yellow line that's in the Cato and Smitty MOAs.
Right.
And it leaves the Reserve and Morenci MOAs, which you said earlier were too distant for Holloman to use them effectively.
Correct.
So presumably you're not looking at using Reserve and Morenci in the alternative either. Is that right?
Correct.
So really, what that leaves, I guess, is an area closer to Silver City than the Morenci and Reserve MOAs, or that somehow expands that narrow sliver that's at the north without impinging on the airspace you're about to return to the FAA.
I'm going to agree with all those comments. If you also look on that chart, where the oval is around...
it becomes dangerously close to Silver City.
And it was not intentional to say...
I realize it's an approximate oval.
Exactly, it's an approximate oval. If you look on there also, there's a black and white dotted line to the south. It's
labeled Victor Route.
Victor Route, exactly. That's the highway in the sky that civilian aviation uses. So that route, it goes from San Simeon to Silver City, then up to Truth or Consequences, and then up eventually to Albuquerque, is an important Victor route. So you go, if I'm going to impinge on that Victor route, I'm going to have to do some mitigations on how I'm going to do that. So I don't know what I got, where I can go, where I should expand, and what it should look like until we kind of got what we found out from the public in our scoping. And please, go to the website, make your comments. We encourage you to go to that and make those comments, and they will be part of the administrative record. Or send them to that address. Sign up for the draft EIS when it's available for you to look at. But we don't know what we don't know, and that's what we were trying to get information on all this stuff. So, again, the Air Force had no intentions of trying to deceive anybody in Silver City, and I'm passionate about this. We want to be open and transparent more than we've ever been before. The internet is our friend. It passes information quickly. I've given you several websites or several things to look up you can find over the internet. It's our friend, but at the same time, it can work against us. So it's very important that we get the right message out, because if the wrong message gets out, it spreads like wildfire, like everything else, and we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that we're open and transparent. So,
Well, I greatly appreciate that attitude. I greatly appreciate you being here and answering all of our questions. And I'm done. No, where'd he go? You didn't expect me to be done.
So just to be, just one more time for everybody here, especially me, I think. The scoping period is effectively over, but you're still going to receive scoping comments.
Any comments that are received anytime during this process, the Air Force by law is required to review.
And the sooner we get those comments to you, the better. What would you say would be a deadline for those comments, or do you know?
I would love to see those comments over the next 2 weeks. If I got a lot of comments in the next 2 weeks, it'll help me lean forward on the scoping. As of right now, I have the contractor developing the information focused on the east because of the inputs that may come in from this side of White Sands Missile Range.
And these are two options. Option 1 and 2 is it?
Well, thank you for bringing that, and let me explain that a little bit.
Thanks.
But they're option 1 and 2 only because there's an area to the west and an area to the east. As we develop the EIS, we could find option 3, 4, 5, 6, 12. There could be a lot of different options that are picked. When we have a draft EIS, we will say, this is our preferred alternative, and these are other alternatives that can be looked at, and each of those will be analyzed. So, some of them you may like, some of them you may not like, and we would like to hear the public comments. That's what we're trying to do. So, I can tell you right now, we only have 2 broad brush alternatives. But as we analyze this information from the public scoping comments that we receive, information that we've received, that may end up being a 3rd or 4th or 5th alternative. I've seen as many as 7 alternatives in an EIS.
And of these 2 alternatives that you have now, is one going to be selected over the other, or maybe a combination of the 2?
What we said in the notice of intent was the Secretary of the Air Force may choose one or the other, or may choose both.
Okay.
So the alternatives may be a mixture, a hybrid of some of this and some of that. When we start getting into the analysis and we start actually counting numbers of sorties and what we're going to fly at low, what we're going to fly at high, and where we can fly high and where we can fly low, then those other alternatives will flow out and give us alternatives.
I mean, I have another chance to ask you this question.
Please.
So I'm still concerned about the current flights of these larger planes that I believe actually started a fire the other day. How do I find out what base those are coming from?
Well, if we have a time date, hopefully we can track that down.
Okay.
But please give me time and date. If we thought the Air Force was responsible for starting a fire or flying places where we shouldn't be flying, doing things we shouldn't be doing, we want to know that.
Well, now I'm coming to the realization it may not have been the Air Force at all, and it may not have been from Holloman, but obviously U.S. military of some sort.
I will tell you, I've had a lot, my office also does all the noise complaint that comes through the congressional, so I have seen a lot of those congressional investigations we've looked through. We've explained what was going on, using a VR route. Perhaps the person was flying low altitude. Maybe the first time that person ever seen an airplane. We fly, and we will tell the people how many times we flew over that area and that kind of information. Other times, they showed me a picture of the aircraft, and one time it was a crop duster, the other time it was belonged to the Forestry Service. Well, because we had an airspace action going on, at least people go, oh, they're there. And so we're happy to take those comments. I will tell you, the Public Affairs Office is the focal point for that kind of information at Holloman Air Force Base for this area. And they're happy to take any of those questions. Their phone number, I'll give everybody a chance to write this number down, for Holloman Air Force Base Public Affairs, is area code 575-572-7756. So if you see an airplane that you think is an Air Force airplane that's doing something wrong, dangerous, starting a fire, dropping flares over the Gila Bend at this time, I would love for you to get on the phone and let Holloman Air Force Base know that right away. The sooner the better, and we will investigate that vigorously.
Who's your public relations guy here? Okay, cool. I'll show you this picture that was sent to me. I'm pretty sure it's not a crop duster.
If it's got 4 airplanes, I'm pretty sure it isn't. So I'll be happy to look at it too.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
I have more of a comment than an actual question. You know, I think bottom line is that we all have nieces, nephews, family in the Air Force, and we all want them to have the best training possible.
Right.
And we all care about the training they get, because when they're put in harm's way, we want them to do the best that they can in order to survive and protect our assets and ourselves and our people and our country. But at the same time, we want to make sure that it is absolutely essential that you have to use our Gila National Forest. And we want to make sure that all the studies and everything is done and done correctly before you get started running a bunch of airplanes or jets through our forest. But bottom line is, we do want them to have the best training possible.
Right.
And I think we all agree on that. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we do everything possible to keep the training in the same areas that they've been training for a long time, unless it's essential that they use this type of terrain.
I appreciate that.
Keep it to a minimum.
I understand that, and it is our goal as an Air Force to get our training done with the minimum impact that we would create to the civilian, whether it's general aviation, whether it's commercial aviation, or it's the people living. I will just tell you as a side note, and I've told this before, my favorite uncle in the entire world came from Silver City. It's on my short list of places to retire that I told you I was going to retire in. So I was anxious to come to this meeting. I'm anxious to come back again because I really want to look at this part of the country. You have special place here. I understand that. The Air Force understands that. We want to minimize whatever impacts to make sure we get our training done, but minimize those impacts to you all. And that's our goal equally. So we will be honest and truthful as we go forward in that EIS, and expect comments, harsh comments, if you don't agree with what we say as we go forward. We want those comments. So.
Anybody else? Anyone have anything else? Before I close? Alicia, you got anything? So, just one more thing. I was sitting in a restaurant downtown last week, and my back was to these people. And I don't know if it's just human nature or what, but one person was telling this other person that, did you know that they're going to start bombing in the Gila wilderness? And I thought to myself, you know, I could get up and say something, but no, I'm not going to do that. But would you just lay to rest whether or not you're going to bomb in the Gila wilderness?
I'll be happy to do that. First of all, I'd like to thank the New Mexico Codels, the county commissioners here for Grant County, the mayor of Silver City for asking for this meeting. I think it's very important that we come out here and explain to you face-to-face what happened. So I need to be here. And this will not be my last trip to Silver City, unless we completely drop Alternative 2. But absolutely, the question we had yesterday, the Codels built a telecon yesterday that I participated in that had some state organizations, forestry, and some other organizations that were interested. And the question was specifically, are we going to stop hunters and fishermen from going into the Gila during this time? We have areas of the United States that are called restricted areas. White Sands Missile Range is a restricted area because we do hazardous activities there as defined by the FAA. We drop ordnance, we do things that are dangerous to the public. We have certain areas of those areas that are called impact areas, where we shoot ordnance into, we drop bombs into, and where those bombs hit, we don't know if it exploded every time. So there's some unexploded ordnance out there. So those areas will always be off limits to people. Those are restricted areas. We have to control the land beneath the restricted area for us to operate in a restricted area. So if that restricted area goes to the surface, let me make sure I'm clear on that. Let me say it one more time. If a restricted area since 1965 goes to the surface, I have to control the land underneath that. That's a restricted area. We are talking about military operations areas, and we will have no jurisdiction on the use of the land beneath that area. We want to minimize those impacts to what would happen underneath that area, but we will not stop people from going into the Gila National Forest or the wilderness areas.
So no bomb.
No bomb.
There you go. That's all I asked. So, Mr. Schaefer, it appears that the commission is done with their questions. If you would like to stay and listen to some public input, we would appreciate that. You're welcome to. If you guys need to go out and take a break real quick, we can do that.
I am happy to stay. I want to know as much as I can about this area. Again, I may be retiring here and be your neighbor soon, so I want to know as much as I can. So I'm happy to stay and listen to those comments. The only thing that might drive me away is if public affairs drives me to talk to somebody over the next few minutes. But I'm parking myself right over there and love to hear everything it's said.
Thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate all you gentlemen coming, giving us all your information tonight.
Thank you.
So we're gonna go light. We still have a quorum. But I was going to ask, I see Representative Martinez in the back of the room, and I was going to ask if he would like to make a few comments. Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is the button still on there?
It is now.
Yeah, it is.
All right.
Talk loud. These guys want to be able to hear you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And, thank the commission for providing this venue. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here in Grant County. Certainly, we saw, I don't know if you peeked outside earlier, and saw the number of individuals that are concerned about what's going on. And it's certainly because of our area. We certainly recognize that we have a pristine forest, a wilderness that's one of the oldest wildernesses in the U.S. And we're concerned by not only the people that are here, but the people within the region. We're talking about fishermen, hunters. Tourism is a huge industry in our area. So these are the issues that we need to identify. We need to make sure that we protect our pristine forest and be ensured that there's not going to be any environmental harm to our area. I did miss most of your presentation, but thank you for being here, and I'd like to maybe sit down and visit with you at some time. But then again, it's very important for us that are natives and those that live in Grant County, that we make sure that our forests, our environment are protected not only for us, for our children, our grandchildren, and the future of New Mexico. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and We hope to hear from you soon.
Did we end up having a sign-up sheet? Is that?
Or did we not?
Yes, there is a sheet.
Would somebody bring that to me? Mr. Russell probably did this for... Thank you, Peter.
So we only had 30 people show up today? Okay, speak.
So we've got about 25 to 30 people or so. We're going to give you 3 minutes apiece.
Yeah, feel free not to take all 3 minutes.
I mean, you found out that there's a lot less nefarious thoughts out there than you thought when you came in the door, so yeah, if you don't want to use them, it's not going to hurt our feelings at all. And remember that the people behind you still want to have their turn. So some of these are going to be a little tough to read. Some of them have very nice handwriting. So let's try to have Nathan newcomer. Still in the room? Going once. Going twice. Brett Myrick. I like that name.
I was named after Brett Maverick.
Me too.
All right.
What year though?
What year were you born?
What year were you born?
I'm not telling all these guys that.
I don't know if I was first.
All right, I'm 61.
Me too. Now what month? They're brothers.
All right, February.
Oh, you beat me.
All right, I'm your elder, so listen up. All right, well, thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, panel of Air Force, Lieutenant Holloman, and your service. So, first I'd like to answer, I guess, do I have to introduce myself, or is that good enough for me to call my name? Yeah. All right, I'm Brett Myrick. I live in Gila, New Mexico, and I served our country in Naval Special Warfare SEAL Team 5. So I'm very familiar with all kinds of jet aircraft. These guys would understand. And I'll just lay out one. I've been under F-16s and F-18s doing touch and goes out of San Clemente Island. That's only one. But I've been around all kinds of aircraft and jumped out of more than you can shake a stick at. So to answer one of the Commissioner's questions, your four-prop aircraft you've been seeing are C-130s. I know the sound of them when they're powering up to take off, and I know the sound when they're going over me. And to answer the other question about the sound of a jet going over you at 500 feet, we'll just give it that, AGL, in the wilderness is not good. And I've experienced it. I believe there was, I call Fort Bliss, there were a German airman that flew out of Fort Bliss. So they told me it was German fighter pilots that were flying over the Gila at that time. This would be 1998. And we were in a slot canyon on the middle fork of the Gila River when this jet aircraft went over. And obviously it's, a blip. But the concussion of sound that went into that canyon brought us all to the ground. And it's not like I'm afraid of aircraft. I've been around them a lot. It was unbelievable, that concussion of sound in a slot canyon in that wilderness. So I'm familiar with them on runways, I'm familiar with them on open terrain in the desert, and it is off the charts in that wilderness. So that should answer your question.
Brett, was it supersonic?
I couldn't tell you that. I mean, you're in a canyon, a jet, I don't care if an aircraft is going 300 miles an hour or 700 or 800. It's so fast, I'm not going to be able to judge that. Yeah. But it's going fast enough to make...
Comments to the commission.
Okay. So I'll just say this after answering those two questions, that I'm opposed to any jet aircraft, military aircraft in the Gila wilderness. I believe maybe it'll make it quicker for Mr. Schaefer to retire, or maybe they just take this map of the Gila Wilderness, crunch it up, and circle the size, and it'll make the EIS process easier. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, and everyone that came here.
Thanks, Brett. Ken Kepliger? K-E-P-P-G or E?
Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Kepler. I live here, and I served in Vietnam. And
Thank you for your service.
well, thank you for yours. But I'm a folklorist, even though I made my living doing construction work a large part of my life. And I see things in a context. When I was in Vietnam in 1965, when the big push came in 1965, my uncle was working for the Defense Intelligence Agency in the Pentagon. And when that started, he said, I couldn't believe it. There was so much celebration because finally people were going to get promoted. And so this is part of the context of all military work. It is without wars, without fear, nobody gets promoted. And when people retire higher up in the military, a lot of them go to work for arms dealers and things like that. And Eisenhower tried to keep it low, tried to keep it so it didn't have control over a place where people wouldn't say, well, we might give you some of your airspace back. And because without the industrial war machine, lieutenants, with that industrial war machine, lieutenants can become captains, captains can become colonels, and colonels could become generals. This is the crux of the situation here today. This push to increase training flights also increases the number of pilots and planes, guaranteeing more promotions. Some of these pilots coming in might be like those Germans, might be training from other countries and may not have the same requirements that we do. More equipment sold guarantees better prospects in the offense/defense industry for high-paying jobs on retirement. And I don't want to imply in any way that all officers or anybody else has that same, they all think the same. They don't, because some of the information I got is from that, and also myself being in intelligence in the Army and having many relatives in both the CIA and the DIA, I have a lot of different kinds of information going on. The U.S. Yes, thank you. The U.S. makes lots of money selling arms to countries all over the world. This causes local military disasters that we get involved in. Soldiers die, civilians die, their homes are destroyed, but officers get promoted. Think about Raqqa. We had to kill them and destroy their homes to save them. Think about those who dishonor the Prophet in Egypt by committing genocide in Yemen with our weapons, ones we sold to them, because the Sunni Wahhabists wish to wipe out all Shia off the face of the earth, and we're helping them do it. This is why they need to train more pilots and to destroy our precious wildlands. This has nothing to do with the security of the United States, but a lot to do with the careers of military men and the profits of the war industry. Will the next move be that they need a place for the military to practice house-to-house combat in a dry mountainous region? Will Pierce sell us out? Will Silver City be the place where they hold their exercises? Will they practice bombing our cities next after destroying our environment? Thank you.
Patrice Munchnick? Patrice Munchnick?
Patrice.
Good evening.
I have to put my glasses on so I can read and stand on my tiptoes. Okay. There it is. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm here as a private citizen. My name is Patrice Muchnick, and I live in Gila Hot Springs, just a few miles from the cliff dwellings. My husband was an Army Special Forces medic He died in 2001. My daughter's name is Ella Jazz Kirk. She was also an advocate for wild places. I'm happy to see that the commission hasn't politicized this issue. This is not about political persuasions, Republicans and Democrats. We all support the troops. We all support our military. Rather, the commission needs to be united in its commitment and support for our children's future, for the future of a balanced and sustainable society that supports diverse economic development and healthy forests and clean water. All of us in Grant County, this is what we want. This is what we believe in. We value our public lands here. This is who we are. We believe in the individual rights to privacy. That's who we are. We live lives of our choosing. We live rural lives. They're based on the ethics of a shared community, of a clear morality that we treat our neighbors kindly. I live in the Hot Springs, and as a community, we've been subject to low-flying aircraft for more than 10 years. I remember with my daughter, the Met aircraft buzzing the campgrounds, literally buzzing the top of the Forks campground, freaking all the people out. And it wasn't just once in a while, it was every Sunday. It took us months and months of complaints to Holloman to get any response, months and months for our senators and our congressmen to listen. Where we live, we are campground owners, biologists, hunting guides, we're homesteaders and ranchers, and we're dependent on this wilderness and the qualities of our environment. And the commission, I would suggest that it seems that you should join together, because what we realized tonight, what I've realized is how little we know, how much information we don't have. And I'm very pleased that the issue of expanded airspace has brought into focus the fact that we are already subject to flyovers. And C-130s, yes. Warthogs, yes. I've seen them. Fighter jets, yes. So I think you need to learn everything you can. Things that we don't know now are a list. We should see the records of all the complaints that have come from Grant County citizens to Holloman. And if we're going to complain to Holloman now, but the planes are coming from Tucson, what is it that we don't know? The commission should consider getting itself a task force that has the legal expertise to deal with these issues. We as a community know what it's like to work with public institutions. We have a Forest Service that we keep accountable. We have Game and Fish that we keep accountable, our local police, our local officials. And it's time that now we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to come together, and the commission is going to have to be advocates for all the citizens in Grant County, so we can have the future that we all expect and that we all hope we can give to our children.
So next is Allison, and followed by Donna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I'm Allison Civic, Executive Director of the Gila Resources Information Project and the Gila Conservation Coalition, and I'd like to thank you, all of you, the Grant County Commission, for organizing this special meeting this evening, and also thank you to the Air Force for being here tonight. As you can see from the crowd this evening, the expanded Holloman Special Use Airspace proposal for possible F-16 training over Silver City and the Gila is of critical importance to the more than 100 people jammed into this room tonight. However, I want you to know that the level of concern is much broader than those in this room. I have signatures and public comments from 2,300 people who oppose alternative number 2. People who love Silver City and the Gila region, people who have grown up here, who live here because of the peace and solitude and rural quality of the area, people who move to the Gila region for retirement because of its quiet, people who don't live here but visit the area as tourists, backpackers, hunters, fishermen, people who care about the untrammeled wilderness characteristics of the Gila and Aldo Leopold wilderness areas. The overwhelming message to the Air Force tonight is expanded special use airspace for F-16 trainings as contemplated under Alternative 2 is incompatible with our community and with the Gila National Forest, the Gila and Aldo Wilderness Area. We don't want it. We don't want it. We think this proposal will have a huge negative impact on us. I also want to mention that more than 23 organizations, including the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance, Gila Conservation Coalition, Upper Gila Watershed Alliance, Gila Resources Information Project, local organizations, as well as many others, have signed on to a comprehensive list of scoping comments that we'll deliver to you tonight. Finally, we're very, very disappointed and indeed angry that although Mr. Schaefer has told us that the Air Force is very interested in our input, Holloman did not include Silver City and Grant County in its plans for scoping meetings. This is unacceptable and a violation of the spirit of NEPA to not include input from communities potentially impacted by a federal agency action. So I'm glad Holloman is here tonight, and I hope that they recognize that moving forward, they can't leave us out of the process. And based on Holloman's comments this evening, the public expects to see them all back here in Silver City when the draft EIS is available. Thank you.
So next we'll have Donna and then Lance. Grace?
Good evening, Commissioners and Mr. Schaefer. Thank you for letting us make comments tonight. I'm Donna Stevens, the Executive Director of the Upper Gila Watershed Alliance, which is a nonprofit watershed protection group based in the Gila Valley. Our members are very concerned about the proposed expansion of flights over the Gila National Forest, especially in our wilderness areas. Some of our concerns we've already heard about tonight, so for the sake of brevity, I'll cut that short. And I just really want to talk about a couple of issues. So we are really concerned about the chaff that will be dropped into the Gila, not just because it's a source of littering, which responsible citizens don't do, and but also, more importantly, because we are concerned about the impacts on wildlife. Will animals think that the chaff is a food source and ingest this dangerous stuff with consequences to their health? I will have to say, personally, my biggest concern is noise. There are thousands of studies about the negative impacts of noise on humans and wildlife. In fact, the sheer volume of studies shows us what a huge problem it is. Most of us live in southwest New Mexico for the excellent quality of life, including such amenities as the Gila and Aldo Leopold wilderness areas and the Gila River, the last free-flowing river in the state. When the world is too stressful and crazy, which it has been a lot recently, many of us head into the forest for some peace and quiet. If we are no longer able to experience tranquility on our visits to the Gila Wilderness, the world's first designated wilderness area, where can we go to get away from it all? Silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have Lance, and then next is Nancy Hudson.
Hi, I'm Lance Grace. I'm from Alamogordo. I'm retired from the Air Force. I flew fighters for 27 years. I have 10 years operational fighters, 10 years as a test pilot, and 7 years as a contractor. I have an incredible amount of fighter time, and in all the areas around here within hundreds of miles. I really came here tonight because I read a lot of stuff that I think is misinformation or confusion or whatever, but in reality, the vast majority of it was cleared up by this guy right over here, Alan. I've heard airspace briefings and explanations for various sundry things for 42 years. I don't want to turn this into a love fest, but Alan did as good a job as anybody I've ever seen on your explanations, and everything he said, whether you guys agree with it or not, was 100% on. I absolutely found nothing that he said that was wrong. Now, as far as what I was going to bring up was some of the stuff that I thought was kind of nutty or whatever in some of the things that I've read, and some of that he cleared up. And the fact that there's no missiles, bombs, guns, rockets, or any of that kind of stuff expended in special use airspace. That's restricted airspace. The only stuff that comes off are defensive chairs and chaff and flares. I can talk about them a lot. I've done a lot. I've used them a lot. I've thousands and thousands of them, and I've been involved with testing of all those too. I highly doubt, a lot of people have different ideas of what a flare is. Something you have in your trunk of your car, you light it and you throw it out on the side of the road. That's not what these things are. It's actually the contents of a canister that is forced out. When those contents hit the atmosphere, they spontaneously ignite, burn for 3, 4, 5 seconds, and it's gone. At 18,000 feet, my guess is that these things are actually probably good down to a few hundred feet or whatever, but in reality, they're going to put an incredible buffer. My guess is that if that stuff comes out of a canister, the probability of the contents reaching the ground and not combustion ready, probably real close to zero. The chaff has been in development from World War II to today. Today it consists of the glass about 1.5 to 2 times the size of human hair diameter. Okay, it's coated with aluminum. It's cut to 1/3 to 2 inches long. You will never find a piece of that stuff on the ground. It's basically impossible. And when it's over and done with, it is part of the surface of the earth, which are the three most common elements on the surface of the earth, which is oxygen, silicon, and aluminum. The other stuff, you talked about tanks. You're not going to see tanks falling out of the sky. Airplanes, there will be accident at some point. And I just wanted to, booms, hey, there's going to be noise. There are booms. The way that Alan explained it, there are some setups in a 20 or 30-minute flight over in the range. You may, depending on the kind of flight it is, 1, 2, 3 minutes of supersonic flight. But that said, you do not have fuel. 16, I would imagine, would burn up, and I've flown 16s a few hundred hours, would probably burn its entire supply in probably 10 to 15 minutes. And so it's just not, you have to be very conservative with the use of afterburner, and therefore your supersonic flight is very short spurts.
Thanks.
So anyway, I think Alan did a great job here. And yes, I am supportive of this.
Thank you. Next is Nancy Hudson and Jake Roberts to follow that.
Hello, my name is Nancy Hudson, and I have to say, Silver City was my home for many, many years. I raised my children here, and they grew up in the Gila. The Gila is very, very dear to me, always will be. We still come back, spend a lot of time there. It's a very special place indeed, and I'm so proud of you all that you're so protective and proud of it. That makes my heart warm. Having said that, though, I am from Alamogordo, and I'm a part of a group called Main Gate. Main Gate, I want to tell you, is strictly independent. We're funded, it's volunteer. We don't get outside money. There's none of that. We do it to support our soldiers, airmen and women at Holloman. All right, and that's the strict purpose of it. I want to let you know, I spend a lot of time in the Lincoln. The Lincoln is a beautiful forest too. I invite you to come up there. A different kind of beauty, but it's absolutely gorgeous. Just like I did a lot of hiking, fishing, camping in the Gila, now I get to do it there, right by Holloman Air Force Base. So Holloman is in the base. If you haven't been there, in Alamogordo, and then just barely, up the mountain, right there is the Lincoln. I'm in the Lincoln all the time. I'm going to tell you, I don't notice the aircraft, very, very seldom. Sometimes I'm out fishing. This is the truth. See, you laugh at that, but this is the truth, and that's why I invite you to come. I invite you to come. I swear to God, I'm telling you the truth. And the people that know me here know I'm a truthful person. I'm not saying you don't ever see them. You see them up in the skies, but it's not like they're doing touchdowns. When I lived near Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, and I was just off the flight pattern, we did touchdowns. I was 12 miles out. Let me tell you what, you noticed that. My little 1-year-old son at the time used to beg me to go out at sunset because that's when they do it. And let me tell you, it did rattle the windows. It did did rattle the windows. But our sonic booms that we have on occasion in Alamogordo proper don't rattle my windows. They're up so high, do you hear it? Occasionally. But can I tell you what happens much more frequently, both in the forest and in Alamogordo proper? When remember, 56% of the flights, more than half, are happening right there at the base. Thunder and lightning. Thunder and lightning you hear much more frequently than you'd ever begin to hear in aircraft. And this is right in our hometown, right by Holloman Air Force Base. So there is true, there's a lot of misinformation. I know some of the people up here have known Harry for many, many years. I know you're not going to get too caught up in that. I know you're going to do the proper research to find out what is real and what is not. And I know you're going to protect the Gila, and that's a good thing. But please know that, this mission is very incredibly beneficial to our state in many, many ways. One of the things we're going to commit to you from Alamogordo is our Chamber of Commerce. We've got thousands of airmen and women that look for things to do in our state, right, gentlemen? This community, we are totally going to be promoting the Gila and Silver City as an area of entertainment and to get out of town for our airmen and women who are serving. We are absolutely committed to that. I talked to the head of the Chamber of Commerce today. That is something that we will definitely, so that you can have the expanded opportunity for your tourism industry, and let these airmen and women get into the Gila to find what a beauty and what a gem it is. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, Jake Roberts, followed by Shelby Hallmark.
Commissioners, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the microphone. Somebody get him an invoice.
Alan, once again, thank you very much for coming to Silver City. We greatly appreciate having you out here and having this information. I am also from Alamogordo. We came to kind of support this initiative that's actually happening. Commissioner Edwards, I actually wanted to kind of address some of your concerns, because there were some of mine as well, specifically dealing with the livestock that are surrounding the Alamogordo areas and a lot of the ranchers. I've actually spoken to some of these ranchers about what kind of impact the flyovers and the jets have. Three specifically, G.B. Oliver, Joshua Ramsey, and Jeffrey Rabin. They all own land that's directly in the flight patterns, whether taking off or landing, or even in the afterburning areas of the Air Force Base. And they've mentioned to me that they're not even a little concerned about the impact that it has on their livestock. In fact, they've actually migrated them from more remote areas to be in these designated ranches for just that. When I asked them whether they'd seen the negative impact, they said that their calf population is normal. Whenever the flights take off, and these can be sometimes dozens, even hundreds of flights a day, that the cows don't even move their heads. So it has a lot to do with them really becoming adaptable to their surroundings. They do that very, very rapidly and very, very quickly. Something else that was kind of brought up, when we did ask them what their concerns were from the Air Force and any kind of falling debris, they actually said they have zero whatsoever. They're actually much more concerned about the natural predators, the coyotes, and also lightning strikes. And we all know how frequent those happen. So they actually lose more livestock in groups to these lightning strikes rather than they do to, again, any impact or environmental impact that comes from these jets. So they're pretty comfortable with these missions and support Holloman Air Force Base and their expansions. Real quick, I also wanted to touch on some of the hunting concerns that are actually brought out there with the wildlife. Sunspot, as you guys are probably aware, is actually home to some of the best hunting that we have in the area, as well as our mescalero areas. These attract a lot of avid hunters and a lot of champion hunters and companies that work, that do a lot of sponsor these events. They find no impact as well from the jet noise coming over. In fact, as Nancy mentioned, right when you come up out of the Holloman Air Force Base, you fly directly over the mountains, directly over a sunspot, and they have seen zero impact as to the animals. Once again, they adapt very, very quickly. Again, so some of the areas that we do the hunting is, of course, with the elk, the mule deer, and the turkey. Those are the ones that we're just the most familiar with. But again, That's just been from our observation. So again, we do want to say that we do support these changes. These can be, have a huge economic impact for all the surrounding cities, and we just want to kind of come and support that. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, we have Shelby Hallmark, followed by Paul Pierce.
Good evening. Thank you, Commissioners and folks from the Air Force, Mr. Schaefer et al. My name is Shelby Hallmark. I'm from Silver City. I'm a hiker, horseback rider, trails advocate, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Grant County Democratic Party. It's important that the Air Force has come here to Grant County to hear our voices and our views about the F-16 flyover proposal. Grant County is a unique place, and the reactions you'll hear from us and the comments you'll get from us are different from those you will get from TRC or Las Cruces or Carlsbad or Alamogordo. People here are okay with being 3 hours from a major airport, being off the interstate grid, off of a lot of grids. Most of us are here because we want to be here. I call the folks who grew up here, for the most part, salt of the earth, or hot sauce and green chili of the earth as well. And then there are folks like me who come here because we want to participate and enjoy this unique place and these unique people. It's a diverse and a very positive community. My wife and I came here from Washington, D.C., where I was a federal employee for 37 years. We came for the Gila Wilderness in the forest, and to be able to spend our time living outdoors, to enjoy riding, hiking, camping, but mainly just to enjoy the unique beauty of this place. It's gorgeous mountains, it's slot canyons, it's hidden creeks, it's dark nights full of stars. My father-in-law, John C. Roberts, was one of the General Dynamics engineers who designed the F-16 in Fort Worth, Texas, where I grew up. It's an equally beautiful and effective machine. But it doesn't belong here. Over the Gila's quiet, the Gila's solitude, our wildlife, it doesn't belong, and we don't want to see things dropping on Joe Science's horses or Becky Campbell's horses and mules. This is not in my backyard argument, but our particular backyard is the nation's backyard. This is the first wilderness, not just in America, but in the world. This is the mother of all wildernesses. This is not an economic issue. This is about treasuring our country. So please forget about alternate 2.
Paul Pierce, followed by Jeff Ray.
Okay, so thank you for allowing us to address you and hear this proposal by the Air Force. I've been to 2 different meetings now, and I live in TRC, and you guys, maybe you felt shortchanged because you didn't get a scoping meeting as part of the DEIS that's being done, but all we got on the fly zone by TRC, there is another proposal moving forward, was an EA, and we've taken to calling it the stealth EA because the Air Force arbitrarily broke this optimization plan and fragmented it in a way that made it almost impossible to even figure out what they were doing with 2 separate expanded Air Force proposals. Our EA, it's a R5111 fly zone, so when you hear that. We got a scoping meeting, and you guys got nothing. And we got confusion because of the way it was fragmented. We couldn't tell what we were commenting on. When we went to the scoping meeting, dozens of people left there. I'd say 95% of the people that were there left thinking that they had just commented on the fly zone next to TRC that comes down next to our lake, which is our big source of income, our tourism. And we were actually commenting on the DEIS for this fly zone over the Gila, which is fine. We wanted to do that. But we were just run around trying to figure out what was actually happening. So the NEPA process it's a legal mandate. Anyone doing an EIS needs to have public outreach and needs to fully scientifically examine the impacts. The Air Force had already put this EA, the stealth EA, it was in the library, and we were over at the community center having a hearing like this, but no public comment, because it's just an EA, it's a lesser vehicle. And an EIS like they're doing for this fly zone is much more comprehensive. Anyway, we were commenting on what we thought was our fly zone, and it was just a pipe dream. And, it didn't exist because the EA was already over at the library, published, and, and we feel that it's inadequate. It doesn't address the points. It doesn't address, well, there's like 10 or 11 environmental issues that they addressed, and almost all of them we don't think were addressed properly. And so a lot of things were left on the table. And I guess in summary, what I'd like to say, pursuant to NEPA, the EA for the R5111 fly zone should have been an EIS. And you guys should have had a proper scoping meeting. So there's already tons of problems wrong with the process that's going on. So if you think there's going to be a transparent and open process and lots of public outreach as required by law, you need to get up early and plan on being up late. Thank you.
So we have Jeff Ray.
What was the name?
Jeff Ray and Tom Cavanaugh after that. Hi, Jeff. Long time no see.
Has been. I'll clarify that name. That's Jeff Ray. I'm a native of Grant County. Grew up in Santa Rita, lived in Baird, and I live now in Silver City. With due respect to everybody in this room, I appreciate this opportunity to comment, despite the fact that our opportunity for public comment has been provided in somewhat of a neglectfully tardy manner. I'm a native of Grant County, as I've stated. The Gila country that lies all around us here is near and dear to me. I've long sought refuge within its remote reaches as a source of peace, quiet solitude, and healing introspection. That being my experience, and knowing it's similar for many, many, many others, I have serious concerns about Holloman Air Force Base's proposal for escalated military activities over Grant and Catherine counties. In particular, the Gila and Aldo Leopold wilderness areas that were established by law with explicit protections. I understand the importance of national defense, I truly do, and I respect that. However, with due respect to that interest in national defense, I'm also passionate about the preservation of natural values, of public lands, and private lands also, to be untarnished by unnecessary offensive disruptions. I've experienced some incidences of low flights. Many occurred in the area of Lava Beds National Monument area in Northern California, south of Klamath Falls, Oregon, where the activities of low-flying jets was an unavoidable distracting presence. The flights presumably from Kingsley Field Air Base, 4 miles south of Klamath. However, the particular instance that has always stood out as memorable to me, to say the least, occurred at the southern fringe of California's Death Valley National Park, where the China Lake Naval Weapons Center were located nearby to the south. I had awakened in that very remote place to a peaceful dawn with a great day written all over it. I climbed upon a low-lying nearby rocky knoll surrounded by wide-open Mojave Desert to enjoy my customary morning sun salutations. Suddenly, out of nowhere, two very low-flying fighter jets were upon me, and in the wake of a deafening explosive roar were gone. In that moment, I reflexively fell to the ground, as Brett Myrick described. I felt indeed as if I'd been strafed. As I contemplated the incident, I concluded that those pilots, and I heard the word hot dogs used before, perhaps that would be appropriate here, that those pilots probably took great delight in entertaining me with those low flights. However, all exhilaration of mine aside, I don't need nor want those kind of experiences, and I wouldn't wish them upon anybody else. It's with these comments in conclusion that I go on record today in strong opposition to Holloman Air Force Base's Proposal 2 for escalating military activities over Grant and Catherine counties. And I respectfully urge the representatives of Holloman Base to choose other more appropriate options.
Thanks, Jeff.
Surely there are others.
Thank you. So Tom Cavanaugh and then Peter Russell?
Go.
Okay.
May I take this place?
Sure. Just tell us who you are.
You're my commissioner.
All right. Not for very much longer.
I'm Don Lurson, live out in the lower Mimbres. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
3 minutes.
I've, like some of the others mentioned, been around a lot of military aircraft throughout my short life. Southeast Asia was a real adventure. We dropped a lot of chaff over there from A3s. You can't find it out there, and we dropped a lot of it. I have to agree with our pilot friend back here that those environmental impacts are going to be pretty minimal. Having worked takeoffs and landings extensively with the Navy, yeah, those aircraft make a lot of noise when they're right next to you, but when they're above 1,000 feet, you really don't notice the impact. You really don't. You hear the noise, and it goes by so quickly. I'm a rancher. I ride horses routinely. I spent 40 years in the force.
Let's keep all the comments, sir. Keep all the comments to the commission, please.
Yes, sir. I spent 40 years in the Forest Service, riding horses in lots of different wildernesses, being strafed by A-10 warhogs. Never had a horse go bronco on me. I'm sure there are horses that will. My cattle don't get excited when we have these C-130s coming over 100, 200 feet off the ground every week or two out in the lower Mimbres. My horses don't react to them. We have helicopters coming in doing the same thing. We have the hospital helicopters coming over occasionally. I'm not saying that there aren't incidences where an aircraft may be lower than you want. Most of you don't seem to know that Fish and Wildlife Service flies under 500 feet within the wilderness checking on their wolves, but that's apparently okay. If you've never gone riding on the ridges up northwest of Glenwood on a summer evening, well after dark, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, you look out to the west and you see the aircraft dropping flares on a regular basis. And it's beautiful. It really looks pretty, especially for somebody who watched it happen in Vietnam quite often. So I would just encourage you to make sure you have all the information, as opposed to this one sign that says the EIS has already been written. let's not spread, as our commissioner said, let's not spread false information. Let's get all the facts before we launch into the tirade. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Peter Russell, and then Jesse Franklin Owens.
I'm Peter Russell. I live in Cliff, New Mexico. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
And Cliff appears to be in the center of the ellipse that is the Lobo MOA. I'm quite concerned about this. I live along the river. I live in a community of Cliff, across the river from the community of Gila, just a little bit north of the community of Riverside, a little bit south of the community of Buckhorn. These are all private land areas. We've heard a lot about the Gila Forest and the Gila Wilderness and the Aldo Leopold Wilderness. I don't need to comment further on that. But I do think that the impacts on the private lands of the people who have chosen to live out there in these rural areas where there's ranches and farms and homesteads really need to be heard. I am told that the Air Force is considering flying dozens of flights at 500 feet, at 500 knots over my house, or maybe hundreds, or maybe thousands, or maybe 10,000. And I couldn't live in that house, which is my entire life savings that I have invested in living out in this rural, tranquil, peaceful area. And the people like me that have come to this area and come to those valleys have come for that peace and that quiet and that tranquility. And the people that grew up there and have stayed there, they stayed there for the same reason, for the peace and the tranquility. And so, as I lose my investments and my assets, because I have to abandon the area, and other people have to leave the area because they didn't come to live under 10,000 sorties at 500 miles an hour, at 500 feet over their houses, they will find that they will not be able to sell their houses for anything close to what they invested in them. And so as we consider national values of, national economies, I want to make sure that the small values of the individual residents that live in those areas are considered, and that it's not, when I look at the criteria, just what's best for the national airspace in terms of, the commercial flights and what's best for Holloman, but in the criteria on the Federal Register information, I didn't see anything about what's best for me and the people that live in that area. So I'm quite concerned about it. I'm concerned that the scoping period is closed, and that while my comments will be reviewed, they're not part of the scoping that's going into shaping the EIS. And so I think it's really important that you all consider reopening the scoping so that you can make those comments and include them in shaping the EIS that you consider. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have Jesse Franklin Owens and then Mickey Dubell.
Thank you, Commissioners, and thank you all for coming up here to hear what the people up here, how they feel about what's going on. My focus is narrow and specific. I guess contrary to our friend that offered that there's zero probability of a fire happening in regards to what's going on here, a fire may have been caused by an overflight. I don't know for sure that it was or not. I know that secondhand accounts I have from a rancher and some videotape apparently that exists of a flight that did take place and flares were dropped and then there was a fire. So I also know that currently you can look on the Monathan Air Force Base website. They just started a joint NATO exercise on November 4th called Angel Thunder. So if you all were looking for specifics, and maybe you guys can give us, I know it's not your Air Force base, but if you can find specifics about this specific incident, it might be helpful to us. So I know there was a call out for the, I'm a volunteer firefighter, and I responded on that particular fire. I'm not speaking from my department or anything like that, just as a, private citizen. But the call out, apparently for the county FMO was at like 3:45. So probably start time would be around 3 to 3:30 would be when there was a flight that took place over there. And probably out of that joint exercise, an angel exercise called Angel Thunder. So those are the things I knew about that. And then the other thing about the probabilities that I've heard about is they designed a bridge out in Marinus Valley and they designed it for a 100-year flood. Never going to happen. Then we had 200-year floods in a row, right? So, I don't know, probabilities and things like that, I don't pay too much attention to. So, and the county has not officially made a determination of the cause. It's under investigation as far as I know. Anyway, I did respond to that fire. There was about 30 personnel from 3 different volunteer fire departments from out there and people from the Forest Service. Ended up being about an 800-acre fire. And it just so happened that the winds were pushing into the fire so that it was kind of keeping it from spreading very bad. So if we'd had different wind conditions, we'd have had a way different kind of fire that we would have been working on. Lots of things right there. Then I did hear one, you mentioned some criteria and some things that you use to mitigate circumstances. And I heard you talk about when a fire is an extreme fire danger. So this fire that just took place was under moderate fire conditions, okay? We have low, moderate, high, very high, and extreme. And if you're saying that you're only going to be concerned when it says it's extreme, that's a problem. Because around here, we can have fire, big fire, bad fire, under moderate conditions with the right wind conditions. And most of the time, we're in moderate, high, or one of those other ones. We're currently, I think, maybe just moved into high. So rainy season, maybe that's a time when you could ponder doing activities that are going to create a fire. Otherwise, could be a bad situation. So maybe consider the prescribed conditions like that the Forest Service uses to do a prescribed burn. It has to be right temperature, humidity. They have a lot of conditions, and I would suggest you all maybe look at those things as well, but also not just use extreme as your gauge for when you're not going to do these things. Because around here, we're way different than Oregon, as you know. And so moderate conditions, bad weather can make a big deal around here. So that's
Thanks a lot, Jesse.
So we got Nick and then Robert Fishoff. Is Mick still here? Going once, going twice, he's gone. Robert?
Take his place, please.
I've already got Robert coming up.
My name is Robert Fishoff. I live in Silver City, and I've been here for just a little less than 2 years, and I've spent about 20 years living in the Southwest, 15 of which those were in Santa Fe. And every morning I get up, and I can see on my left, out my window, Bear Mountain, and on my right, I can see Signal Peak, or Pinos Altos Mountain, as some people call it. In front of me, I can see Gomez Peak. So I'm very fortunate. I'm extremely fortunate. And I stand opposed to this proposal, but it's not for my own personal benefit. Although, of course, I enjoy the wilderness, but rather, when I think about it, the Gila Wilderness was the very first wilderness ever created in the world, not just in the United States, in the world. It's, in some ways, it represents the heart of what's good in the United States. And I feel that this proposal on the part of the Air Force, not necessarily the gentlemen sitting here, but their superiors or people in Washington, is some kind of assault on us, not just us here living in Silver City, but everyone in the United States. And somehow I feel like it's my job to act as a guardian, protect this incredibly valuable thing. And I asked the, I'm sorry, I can't think, commissioners, the county commissioners, to consider that. And in their thought process that we have a role here in Grant County to protect this for the benefit of everyone else. That's part of our job. And I feel that way, and I hope that you would feel that way as well. Thank you very much.
Janet Wallen Ortiz. Janet? Joan Bacon next.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. With all due respect to the Air Force personnel, I and many of my neighbors who could not be here tonight, and my children, are totally, vehemently, and adamantly against your proposal to increase flight war practices over our airspace. There are multiple reasons, but I will name just a few, and these are not in rank order, okay? They're all equally important. You already have plenty of airspace to send out your practice flights. Just because the Air Force has a new fighter plane coming off the assembly line does not mean that you can violate our airspace with your war games. We support and concur with the Peaceful Skies Coalition. The current president is Carol Miller. She was interviewed on our local radio station. She receives daily emails from the Pentagon, by the way, updating her on these sorts of things. And the Peaceful Skies Coalition stated that our airspace should never be used for preparation for war because of the noise pollution that occurs. Sonic booms have set off car alarms and broken windows, and the Air Force is continually having to pay for damages being done by excessive noise. This is really an inverted war on all citizens who want to live in peaceful rural areas. I spoke to a businesswoman just today who has an office in Lordsburg, excuse me, and one of the flyovers from, I don't know if it was a C-130 or whatever, shook her whole office while she was in practice. And the patients, the clients, the staff were just in shock until it passed. So this is affecting businesses, obviously. The noise also affects children who are trying to concentrate in school. So this is also a war in education and children in the classroom. And there are reports out of Tucson that would verify that. The fire danger that occurs when pilots shoot off flares into air. I don't care if they disappear in 3 seconds or whatever. There's still some heat element there. There's still some issues there. In the state of New Jersey, one such flare set off a fire that burned 13,000 acres and destroyed 13 homes. So maybe that was the one incident you were talking about. This is a war on the environment and our wildlife because of the chaff that is shot off and the fumes from the planes and the 1 million rounds of ammunition that would be fired annually through these practice flights. The in-flight fueling also causes contamination in the air. The Air Force is in flagrant violation of NEPA by not using an established national baseline for the myriad of effects that these flights cause. They need to pay special attention to social and economic data in creating these baselines and not segment NEPA into a very difficult and confusing process. I agree, we need to reopen the scoping. So what? If it takes longer, it takes longer. You're getting paid. We taxpayers are paying you. So let's do it. Reopen it.
Okay.
Speak out of both sides of your mouth when you say on one hand you care about us, but then you left us out of the scoping process. So don't turn our enchanted skies into nightmares.
Thank you. Joan Bacon, followed by Kim McCurry.
I live here in Silver City, and I work with Becky Campbell, who is a wilderness outfitter, and we use horses and mules. And I have to disagree with the gentleman that spoke earlier, because we have had planes fly over us, and we have horses and mules go everywhere. We have to gather up the animals, we have to pick up the packs. It's a pain. And also, if we are taking dudes in, it's a risk of injury to humans. So I'm totally against any kind of flyovers of the wilderness. Thank you.
Kim McCurry. Okay, Joe Signs.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, where to start with this? My name again is Joe Signs. I'm a wilderness guide and outfitter, and I've been subjected to these flyovers since the 70s. This has been going on for quite a while, and so everything I hear you guys talking about doesn't ring a chord at all, because you're talking like you're going to start something. You're already doing it. I don't understand why this is going on since you're already doing it.
And I'm here to tell you that, I'm Apache, and I've been here for a long time, and I have been here even longer than before I was here. This is sacred country. And we hear these stories about, how they're flying over. I have seen them fly 300 feet, not 500. They're flying at 300, and they're hot dogging. And I have been seeing them do this for 40 to 50 years now. And so this is really bad because it is affecting my business. I have lost clients. I have had accidents. I've had problems. I've had horse accidents. I've had all kinds of different stuff because of these flyovers. And the descriptions that you guys are hearing, they're just touching the surface of some of these situations. For mine, one of the worst things I've ever felt, I felt the ground shake worse than an earthquake in Alaska. And I have felt them over there, and that's even before you hear the sound. You feel that ground just rumbling. So what I'm telling you is that as an Apache and a descendant of the people that were here, there is a reason why this country has the first wilderness, because it's our country and we took care of it and we want to take care of it still. So from my point of view, what you guys are doing, you're lying. This is all lies that are going on here, because you were already doing what you said that you're thinking about doing. And the flights, no, they're not 500 feet, they're 300 feet. And you're affecting my business, you're affecting my life, you're affecting my child. So I'm telling you, as an individual and as a business owner here, you do not have my permission to fly over, and what you are doing, you need to stop. Find some other place to fly. I got a couple suggestions. Mar-a-Lago. Take it over Mar-a-Lago. Take it over the ocean. Take it over your cities where you live, where they live back there. Take it over on them. We are telling you here, no. So please listen to us. Because if you put me in danger with your fares, your fires, all this stuff, I do have that situation.
Address the commission, please.
And where I am getting in danger of these fires. Because if I get burned and I got to protect myself with you guys flying over, I will defend myself and I will protect myself against those pilots.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Indigo Crockett and Lawrence. Indigo and then Lawrence. Lawrence, is there a Lawrence here? I can't read the last name.
Hi, I'm Indigo Crockett. I go to Aldo Leopold High School. I'm 14 years old, and I have a house up in Gila Hot Springs. I want to read a part of a journal entry that I wrote on a school trip. When a child in many public schools learns to read, they learn only one language, letters on a page, pages in a book. Then, when that child matures, they use that skill to learn about their ancestors. However, there's another language. When one enters the wilderness, they can enter a history much deeper than that, farther back. The earth can be read. Layers of text are hidden in pottery, trees, rocks, and fossils. But before you take that information, you have to learn to read. This concept is very uncommon and rarely used in modern schools. If education facilities began to teach this concept and base their curriculum on experiences, students would have more well-rounded and detailed education. Learning more recent history and reading books are a very worth it ability, an important part of learning. However, more experiences and time outside the classroom should be included in public schools. A mix of standard education and wilderness training would be the most neuroprofitable design for schools today. However, we cannot take kids out into the wilderness to learn if the peace and solitude of the Gila is disrupted by obnoxious, disturbing flyovers. Thank you.
So is there a Lawrence here? No Lawrence? Okay. Rosalie? Michelle Connolly? You want to go? Go.
I'm Michelle Connolly.
Okay, I'm going to let him go because he's asked me 3 times when people were missing.
since I can't talk to these guys here, I'll talk to you guys.
That's what you need to do. And you need to talk at the microphone, too.
What do you do this? A gift. I dare you to hang that up in your face over there. I dare you. All right. My name is Ron Romero. I'm not from around here. I'm from Valencia County, Belen. All right? But I visit here a lot. I'm a rafter. I'm a hiker. I'm a backpacker. Car camper, whatever. I bring my granddaughter here. She's only 7 years old. I'm going to use one word here. Unnecessary. What you're proposing is unnecessary. You guys already have tens of thousands of acres, thousands of square miles to do your testing, your training in. You already have all that. Unnecessary. A couple of stories about the flyovers. We've heard a couple. A long time ago, I've done extensive backpacking in a lot of places. Pecos Wilderness. Anybody heard of the Trail Riders Wall? I was up there on top. Here comes a hot dog. 100 feet. Knocked me down. Scared the bejesus out of me. Another little story. Got a friend that's been living up in Gila Hot Springs for quite some time. 30 years or so. He started as one of the guides that takes people up to the cliff dwellings. And I don't know if it was a tour or if he was doing maintenance. He was inside one of the caves, had another one of these hot dogs, buzzed him. The wall shook. So, I'm talking to you guys, but I'm pointing over here. I'm trying to obey your rules, right? Shook the walls. You guys have already weakened the walls. I don't know if you realize, I don't know if you guys realize, I'm looking over here, I'm really talking over here. I don't know if you guys realize this, but you've already weakened those walls. One of these days you're going to do that, and they're going to come down, and there's going to be some French people in there, and there's going to be some English people in there. It's people from around the world go in there. And you're going to crush them with rocks, and you're going to destroy. So I'm going to end with the same word I started with, unnecessary. It's unnecessary. It's government overreach. And I don't believe I'm looking straight. I'm talking to you guys. I'm trying really hard, but I'm really communicating over here. Okay? The government overreach. We all know about it. I don't believe anything about the chaff's okay, the flares are okay. It's not okay. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle Conley.
I dare you to hand it up.
Michelle Conley.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I'm Michelle Conley. I live in Gila Hot Springs, which for you guys, that's right in the center of the wilderness. The road comes into it, dead ends. So the people that live there, we have a real commitment to this wilderness. As people have mentioned, it was the first one designated in the world. I would like to read you what the law says about wilderness. The Wilderness Act created the legal definition of wilderness in the U.S. pursuant to, it gives the number, a wilderness in contrast with those areas where man and his own works dominate the landscape, is hereby recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. An area of wilderness is further defined to mean in the Wilderness Act as an area of undeveloped federal land, retaining its primeval character and influence, without permanent improvements or human habitation, which is protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions, and which generally appears to have been affected primarily by the forces of nature, with the imprint of man's work substantially unnoticeable, has outstanding opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined type of recreation, has at least 5,000 acres of land and is of sufficient size as to make practicable its preservation and use in an unimpaired condition. And 4, may also contain ecological, geological, or other features of scientific, educational, scenic, or historic value. So basically, this proposal violates the Wilderness Act.
So next is going to be Jeff Boyd. Jeff? Is there a Jeff Boyd here? Jeff, come on. You're letting these people take up your time.
Okay, thank you. Well, my name is Jeff Boyd. My wife and I live near the National Forest boundary, just north of here. We frequently use the forest for hiking and camping, and we moved here from Phoenix, like many people, to enjoy the natural environment, the quiet, the clean air, the tranquility that comes from living here. Besides destroying the quality of life here, I'm concerned for the viability of our community. Local businesses heavily dependent on tourism, and the qualities of the national forest would suffer substantially. I don't think it would be the same community here if proposal number 2 is implemented. Based on what a lot of people have said already, I had a couple extra comments, and don't want to duplicate what other people have said. The 500 feet minimum or maximum, minimum height above the ground, I can understand what that means in a flat area. What the heck does it mean in a land of canyons and mountains? We have an elevation, highest elevation of 11,000 feet and the lowest of under 4,500. If you're in a canyon, or you're on the rim of a canyon, and a jet is flying 500 feet above the bottom of the canyon, it's below you. How does that feel? I have experienced it, actually. And based on, other people have too, it's horrible, actually. It's not at all like a wilderness experience. It's not at all like, it's like living or like being on Times Square in New York City when 5 police vehicles are racing by you with their sirens going. And that's probably an underestimate. The other thing I wanted to mention is based on, I was originally a chemical engineer, and people have said, several people here have said, oh, dropping of aluminum chaff, no big deal, you don't even see it on the ground. Well, aluminum happens to be a very reactive metal, and yes, there's plenty of aluminum on the surface of the earth. However, it is combined with other chemicals to make relatively inert compounds. When you toss it on the ground, a reactive metal like that, it's going to react with other things. What other things? Life forms? What's it going to do? It would be good to know. In addition to that, I wanted to mention that chlorine is a very common element. Sodium chloride, we ingest that probably too much. Well, you don't want to breathe chlorine gas. There's a big difference between salt sodium chloride and chlorine gas. So aluminum, you can think of it in a similar vein. Basically, the Gila National Forest is a gem among national forests in the Southwest. I expect if this proposal number 2 is implemented, the soil and water quality will definitely be degraded. Things are not going to get better if this is implemented. It's going to be worse. What does Silver City get out of this? What does the 2 counties get out of this? Nothing. They just get hurt. We have to remember that. This is not going to improve anything. It's not going to add jobs to our economy. It's going to hurt us. Thank you very much.
So that concludes the public comment portion of the meeting tonight. I was going to ask if any of the commissioners want to have a closing statement before we have adjournment.
My closing statement was my opening statement out at the rally. And I'm going to pass on repeating it now because it's after 9 o'clock.
Commissioner Edwards?
Just thank you very much for coming, and we appreciate all the comments.
I appreciate the comments, and thanks. And thank you very much, Mr. Schaefer, for bringing the Air Force down. And I'm sorry, would you let me talk and you be quiet? All right. Thank you, Mr. Schaefer, for bringing your group and attending and staying and listening to the comments. And like I said at the beginning, please look at Silver City or Grant County for your public comment period. And thank everybody for their comments. Thanks for the civil discourse tonight. I think it was great. And I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes.